Chapter 387, The Dragon Lord is About to Awaken. Hagrid's wooden hut at the edge of the Forbidden Forest was alive with the crackling of burning logs and the warm glow of the hearth. The rich aroma of dinner and the lingering sweetness of wine had left everyone nodding in drowsy contentment. Everyone, that is, except Ron. He sat bolt upright, partly because his stomach still rumbled, partly because Alaspade, Hagrid's enormous companion, kept shifting and rustling in the corner. When Hagrid remarked on Alaspade's recently insatiable appetite, Ron could no longer hold back. "Hagrid," he blurted, "why did Dumbledore send for us?" Hagrid paused, his hand resting on Alaspade's scaly flank. "Isn't it obvious?" he rumbled, though his eyes held a flicker of hesitation. At that moment, Harry, whose head had been resting on Ginny's lap, bolted awake as if from a dream. Could it be? Through Ryan, he'd learned that Voldemort had fallen yet again. Was Dumbledore expecting Harry to recall something from his dreams, perhaps an address where the Dark Lord now hid? The idea sounded like Dumbledore, but Harry knew the headmaster better than to rely on riddles. If the information were truly vital, Dumbledore would have told him outright rather than sending Hagrid on a goose chase. Harry sat up, heart pounding. Whatever Dumbledore's plan, it was nowhere near as simple as it appeared. Harry's head was still thick with lingering sleepiness, and Ron's wild speculation only made him more confused. He'd never imagined that Dumbledore was behind all of this. As the greatest white wizard alive, tempered, some said, by echoes of Grindelwald's own cunning, Dumbledore's intuitive powers were almost uncanny. He might not have consciously known that Harry and his friends had slipped away to the moon, but his subconscious had set this entire gambit in motion. Had Ryan not instantly transported them from the lunar surface back to their dormitory, Dumbledore's subtle maneuver would quickly have revealed their disappearance, and with it, the shocking reality of Moon City. "Perhaps Professor Dumbledore is simply too wise for his own good," Hagrid said, leaning on his umbrella with a proud grin. "You see, out of the 4 dragons the Ministry has chosen, 3 are foreign breeds. To most people, a dragon's worth is measured by its size or how fearsome it appears. But Dumbledore, he looks at the political implications, the economic impact, even how each creature's traits could shape the tournament itself. Things you and I would never dream of." The 4 students listened in polite silence, exchanging puzzled glances. They couldn't think of any better explanation, but it still sounded a bit over the top. "By the way," Hagrid added abruptly, shifting his weight, "whatever happened to Fred and George?" Ron's face brightened as he shoved aside his curiosity about dragons. "Oh, they went off to Egypt with Percy to visit Bill," he said, rolling his eyes a little. "And they arranged a blind date for me." Ginny groaned. "Could you give it a rest? I'm not on a blind date. I'm with Harry, remember?" Ron shot her an exasperated look. Harry, Draco, and Hagrid glanced back and forth, baffled. Only Ginny understood that her irritation wasn't really about blind dates. It was about Ron's ill-timed interruption during her conversation with Harry just moments before. But for now, she simply folded her arms and huffed, leaving the boys to wonder what they'd done this time. Ginny pressed a hand to her chest, still damp from Harry's frantic clutch. "It really happened." Harry's eyebrows shot up. "A blind date? Did they actually go to Egypt?" Hagrid exhaled in relief and patted his coat. "Yes, sir. Straight off to Cairo." Ron scowled at them both. "I was asking why Fred and George slipped off Hogwarts last night." "Last night?" Harry's ears perked. "So they were here just hours ago?" Ron rubbed his palms together, a smirk playing on his lips. "Imagine stumbling on those 2 in the corridors, then showing them my new dueling drills." Ginny shook her head, thinking faster than her brother. "But Fred and George avoid the Forbidden Forest like the plague. They wouldn't head there on a lark. This makes no sense." Draco's gaze snapped to Hagrid. "I've heard rumors of werewolves roaming that wood," he said quietly. When Ginny mentioned the twins' odd departure, Hagrid's beard trembled ever so slightly, guilt written all over his face despite the bristling hair. The 4 students turned their full attention to the gamekeeper, waiting for the truth to spill out. "You don't look at me like that." "I promised," Hagrid stammered under 4 pairs of expectant eyes. He waggled his massive shoulders, then gave in. "All right, fine. I'll tell you." Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny leaned forward. "Fred and George," Hagrid began, They've always wanted to open a joke shop, something to rival Zonko's in Hogsmeade. Brilliant minds for mischief, those two. But to brew some of their more, experimental products, they need rare ingredients. He swallowed. Which, let's be honest, you only find in the Forbidden Forest. A hush fell. Ginny's face went pale, her eyes flashing. You mean they broke into the forest? Hagrid shifted uncomfortably. He raised two enormous thumbs, almost touching. Well, I half agreed to it. Half agreed? Ron's tone wavered between anger and disbelief. You let them go in? Ginny sprang to her feet. Hagrid, you could have told Professor McGonagall, or sent Dumbledore a note. My brothers could have been attacked by acromantulas. Hagrid ran a hand through his tangled beard. I know. I shouldn't have let them. What did I care? They're twins, always up to something. I thought if they got what they needed quickly, they'd stop sneaking around. But that's exactly why it was reckless, Ginny shot back. If one of us had gone in. Ron's ears turned red, partly from anger, partly from embarrassment. Look, Ginny, he began, then caught Harry's eye. Harry gave him a subtle nod. Back her up. Ginny whirled on Ron. Oh, so now you're on my side? Ron softened, running a hand through his hair. I'm on the side of common sense. Hermione, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. Whether or not we approve, Hagrid, you need to tell someone in authority. If Fred and George get injured, or if creatures in the forest decide to treat them as intruders. Hagrid's head drooped. I was going to, honest. I thought I could keep it quiet, sort it out, but I suppose it's time I fessed up to Professor McGonagall. Ginny sat down slowly, folding her arms. Thank Merlin. Next time, talk to us first, okay? Hagrid gave a contrite nod, then glanced at Harry. Sorry, Harry, and you lot. I'll do the right thing. Harry offered a reassuring grin. We'll help you, Hagrid. Let's go see Professor McGonagall, together. With that, the group set off to set things right before any more mischief mushroomed. Hagrid, don't worry about us, Ginny interrupted, attempting to calm him. He gave her a half smile, brushing a hand through his wild hair. I've always gone along with you lot. Just humoring you, really. But if you're all set on charging into danger, I'll be the one to put my foot down. After all, I'm a professional when it comes to this forest. He sighed, eyes drifting toward the treetops. Funny thing is, I've always felt oddly at home in these woods. One time I didn't even need Fang. Something in me just led me straight to where Fred and George were hiding. Ginny, Ron, and Draco exchanged puzzled looks, but said nothing. Only Harry noticed the sudden change in Hagrid's expression. It was as though the giant had slipped into a trance, eyes fixed on something beyond the clearing. In Harry's mind, images bloomed, a silvered full moon high above the Forbidden Forest. Dozens of magical creatures, centaurs, unicorns, even a few rare species Harry had never seen, gathered in a great clearing, moving in hushed anticipation. At their center, perched atop the head of a colossal dragon, sat a figure so tall and regal his true features remained cloaked in shadow. Harry's wreath caught. He whispered the names that tumbled from his lips almost against his will. The Thunderborn, Hagrid of the old Hagrid line, Hercules, king of the Forbidden Forest, master of giants, mentor of the Dark Wood, liberator, lord of dragons. He blinked, and the vision vanished. Hagrid's glassy stare softened as he shook himself back to the present. Ginny placed a reassuring hand on his arm, but Harry couldn't shake the sense that, buried somewhere in Hagrid's past, lay a destiny more extraordinary and more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. He thought he heard those strange roars, and suddenly the woods behind him came alive, almost as if invisible vines had surged from the undergrowth to wrap themselves around Hagrid, who stood there lost in a trance. Chapter 164. Hephaestus' names leave echoes on the wind, and wizards' names once uttered rarely vanish completely from memory. Even those deliberately expunged from the record can return, whispered by fate. Harry understood this better than most. In grafting part of his power into Harry, and anchoring a silent surveillance link, Ryan had imparted something of himself into Harry's very nature. Ryan's brand of magic was unlike any other, a living archive fueled by what he called thought-weaving, in which every scrap of information, every lived moment, became indelibly encoded. No one could wrest memories from Ryan, for he believed that the self was the sum of every experience. Yet in his hands, memory was a two-edged blade. He could also implant knowledge into another's mind with ease. This was the same principle behind Grindelwald's prophetic dreams. And so, with Ryan's permission, Harry raised his wand and peered through that arcane lens. He sought a single, monumental name. When the syllables finally resonated in his mind, it was as though the very forest held its breath. Across the grounds, in the shadow of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid stood frozen in trance. Then, at the whisper of that name, Hagrid stirred, though no breeze rustled the leaves. His great frame shifted, hair and moleskin coat lifted in an unseen wind, as if the forest itself had awakened alongside him. Harry and the others watched in stunned silence, hearts pounding at the power they had just unleashed. Alispad slipped down from his web in the corner and prostrated himself before Hagrid. Unseen by Harry and the others, deep in the Forbidden Forest, every creature followed suit. The giant spiders, unicorns, nifflers, bowtruckles, swans, fairies, goblins, thestrals, even the proud centaurs, who would sooner stoop to beasts than admit any kinship with demons or vampires, bowed their heads one by one. An inexplicable power compelled them all, majestic and gentle, like a loving father's embrace. That very power now surged through Hagrid. He blinked, still sensing a veil over his eyes. For a moment he hesitated, then willed his lids fully open. In an instant he saw it. Every creature in the forest stationed at perfect attention, saluting him in myriad postures. A deep, instinctive authority awakened within his heart. Startled, Hagrid slammed his eyes shut. With that sudden gesture, the connection snapped. Out in the forest, the spell of awe dissolved. The creatures shook themselves, stretched their legs and wings, and reverted to their normal demeanors, free once more of any compulsion. Even in their disoriented state, a spark of clarity cut through the chaos. Hagrid began, staring at his enormous hands as if seeing them for the first time. A tremor ran through him as he felt unimaginable power thrumming beneath his skin. He could picture it animating clouds into obedient armies, or even snatching away the magic of an enemy. He shook his head in disbelief. I must be going mad. Harry, finally clearing his mind, took a cautious step closer. Names and titles, ancient and potent, echoed in his thoughts like carved stone: King of the Forbidden Forest, Controller of Giant Creatures, Mentor of the Dark Forest, Lord of Dragons. Hagrid, he asked softly, have you ever heard those titles before? The giant looked baffled, rubbing his chin. No, but they sound oddly familiar. Before Harry could elaborate, Hagrid reached out toward the hearth. The fire leapt higher, embers dancing until they shaped themselves into two bright eyes and a flickering, lipless mouth. Hello, Master, the flame intoned, its voice crackling through the room. At that, Ron's eyes shot open. He scrambled to his feet and stumbled backward. It's alive, he shouted, hair standing on end. Draco, who had pieced together far more than he let on, leveled a glare at Harry. What did you see, Potter? Harry swallowed hard, still shaking from the vision. Those titles, and something deeper, power I've never felt before. His voice wavered, as if the words themselves carried weight. Silence fell, broken only by the fire's gentle crackle, leaving them all to wonder what this newly awakened magic would demand of them next. I'm sorry, but I can't help with that. They were drifting down a quiet corridor at dusk when Ron let out a snort. She really does look like. He stopped himself, though the way his lips twitched made it obvious he'd meant an ancient hag. Draco laughed. Honestly, Harry, your gift is uncanny. If we weren't your friends and hadn't seen your dreams come true with our own eyes, we'd probably think you were making it all up. Harry brightened at the praise. You know, maybe I will sign up for divination next year. His eyes gleamed with longing. In his mind, a single year of Trelawney's lessons would let him master prophetic dreams. No matter where Voldemort ran, Harry would track him, right into the Great Hall, forcing Dumbledore and Professor Riddle to face the Dark Lord's true evil with a pair of Avada Kedavra. A sudden tug on his sleeve brought him back to reality. Harry! Harry! Ginny's voice was full of excitement. What did you dream about this time? Before he could answer, Ron and Draco exchanged weary looks, and Hagrid let out a disappointed groan. Not again, they chorused. Ah, come on, it was just a daydream, Harry said with an embarrassed grin. Ah, sighed Hagrid, and Ron and Draco echoed him in unison. Only Ginny stayed hopeful, leaning in so eagerly her hair brushed Harry's shoulder. Draco cleared his throat and brightened. Well, while you're picking courses, don't forget, arithmancy's on the list too. Harry managed a genuine smile this time. With friends like these, even the most far-fetched dreams felt a little more real. Harry tapped the table absently, recalling how, back in elementary school, arithmetic had been his only companion. Dudley's torment had scared everyone else away, leaving Harry to bury himself in numbers and later in the intricate potion formulas of how to forge a strong heart. He'd worked so hard not just for knowledge, but to prove he would never again be outdone by that insufferable cousin. A cool voice broke into his reverie. "Not bad with sums, Potter," said Draco Malfoy, stepping forward with a polite nod. "I'm Draco Malfoy." "Harry Potter," Harry replied, shaking his hand. His mind still hummed with old grievances, but a strange camaraderie flickered between them. Ginny's bright voice rang out, "Dad's here!" Harry looked up and saw Hagrid, Ron, and Ginny gathered around a low, crackling hearth. The firelight danced across their faces, catching a small, restless flame that seemed almost alive. To their surprise, the flame wavered and spoke in a soft, crackling whisper. "I don't have a name," Hagrid chuckled, leaning in to drop a fresh log onto the grate. "Well, Hephaestus is the god of fire in the old myths. I think that suits you perfectly. From now on, you'll be Hephaestus." At once, the little blaze brightened, sparks drifting like golden fireflies. "It's my turn," Ron declared, crouching beside the hearth. He fed the flame a handful of twigs. "Come on, Hephaestus, show us what you've got." Harry and Draco exchanged curious glances as the flame pulsed and danced in response, eager to demonstrate the wonders of magic once more. And for the first time in a long while, Harry felt the warmth of true friendship and of something far more extraordinary kindled in his chest. Chapter 389, The Power of Activation. High above the waking world, a lone figure lounged on a stretch of sunlit cloud. Ryan looked down through half-closed eyes, the breeze teasing his dark hair as he surveyed the realm below like a prince observing his subjects. Though he appeared as if plucked from a fairy tale, Ryan was no mere dreamer. He was a wizard uniquely attuned to the quiet stirrings of magic. Long before he first set foot in Hogwarts, Ryan had learned of Rubus Hagrid's remarkable gift, the ability to awaken latent power and breathe semblances of life into the lifeless. Through an instinctive spark, wizard's intuition he called it, he could manifest creations from pure will, effortlessly and without conscious thought. It was a talent Hagrid himself had hinted at, an iceberg whose true mass lay hidden beneath the surface, and Ryan was fascinated by every nuance of that hidden force, especially its most astonishing applications, ones that would never have occurred in the original timeline. Take Jerry, the fiendish fire elf, a creature Ryan had brought into being. He had imbued Jerry with the essence of two Horcruxes, blending a fragment of Hagrid's activation power, an inheritance from the Dragon Lord, with his own gift for control. To the uninitiated, the idea of animating objects seemed simple. Wizards could make mirrors speak or pairs dance at a moment's notice. But what Ryan wielded went deeper. It was the raw energy of Genesis itself, the leap from nothing to something, from 0 to 1. And as he traced the curve of the horizon, he knew this was only the beginning. Ryan wouldn't have bothered mastering this technique if it weren't worthwhile, but it does come with a heavier price tag than ordinary magic, which only saps your stamina. Any summoned life form, as long as it remains alive, permanently reserves a slice of its creator's mana pool, the familiar blue bar. Fortunately, there's a simple workaround. Don't give your creation a name. An unnamed construct lives solely on the initial burst of borrowed vitality. Once that runs out, the creature expires and relinquishes any claim on your mana. In effect, the creator retains full control. If you want the life form to persist, you simply allow it to draw from your blue bar. If not, you let its temporary energy drain away. But the moment you bestow a name, especially one you choose for it, the bond becomes irreversible. You cannot unmake it unilaterally. Your only options are to destroy the creature outright or employ advanced transference magic to shift its ongoing cost onto something or someone else. Ryan sidestepped that burden entirely by never naming his summons. In fact, his predecessor to Jerry had been a fearsome fire spirit, but because he left it nameless, its life flickered out of its own accord, and his mana remained untouched. Ryan's power was like a perpetual motion machine, but even he dare not leave it running constantly. Doing so would permanently lower the blue bar's cap, a limit unrelated to his own healing ability. To minimize the cost, he first based the spell on a cat's soul, which kept the drain on his magical reserves small. Then, by applying Goobler's immortal fire principle, he redirected the remaining price into the world's magical magnetic field. What emerged was Jerry, a congenital creature born of heaven and earth, a living embodiment of perfection. Yet Ryan didn't stop there. He forced Jerry to swallow a Horcrux, giving the creature its own independent source of magic. Even if Jerry were cut off from the world's magical field, it would still endure. Only someone with Ryan's unique talents could make such sacrifices. For ordinary Hagrids, the price is unthinkable. In fact, after Ryan rewrote time itself, no Hagrid in their right mind would ever dare use such power on a common object. Magical activation and its uses. Wizards who wield the same activation power as Rubus Hagrid almost always apply it to living magical creatures. By channeling their energy into an already sentient beast, they can bring order to its chaotic instinct, CTs, and then bend its will to their own. Even under Hagrid's unconscious influence, these creatures would coalesce, however briefly, into distinct new species capable of overcoming normal reproductive barriers. In the original timeline, it was Hagrid's inadvertent surge of activation magic that created the blasting-tailed Scroot. His power fused a fire crab with a manticore, a creature with a human head, a lion's body, and a scorpion's tail, giving birth to an entirely new life form. When it comes to non-living objects, practitioners of activation typically choose items of great significance, wands, swords, artifacts whose power exceeds their own, and breathe lasting life into them. That is why it was unprecedented when Hagrid focused his activation magic on nothing more than an ordinary campfire, and then went so far as to name it. By bestowing a true name upon the flame, he transformed it from a temporary illusion into genuine living magic, as if the very act of naming wove it into existence. Yet, for all its novelty, this feat scarcely affected Hagrid himself. After all, before his spell, it was simply an ordinary fire, no more remarkable than any other hearth blaze. Hephaestus's very existence would only mean one thing for Hagrid: he'd be eating even more than before. Hagrid hardly leans on magic. His sheer size and strength are far more intimidating. Yet if he continued enchanting and animating every inanimate object without recognizing his own limits, he'd effectively turn into a muggle who enslaved legions of strange life forms. Isn't this just Harry Potter's version of a super rookie? Ryan thought with a crooked grin, recalling those trainers who rely on Pokémon to fight while boasting robust physiques of their own. Back in his wooden hut, Hagrid rubbed his rumbling belly. He felt the familiar tug of hunger. His gaze drifted to the hams and pheasants hanging from the ceiling beams, then to a barrel in the corner filled with raw, unpickled dragon meat, unsent to Alispard, and therefore still untouched. He sighed with a low rumble. "Nothing here that's ready to eat," he muttered. True, a man of his girth never went hungry for long, but what he needed now was something hot on the table and ready right away. In the days immediately following Christmas, Hagrid had been on a non-stop cooking spree. He, Harry, and the others had already demolished every festive dish he could dream up, even the dragon sausages he'd grilled that very morning. Just when Hagrid was reaching for yet another pan, Harry spoke up. "Hagrid, why don't you have the house elves bring up the food?" Hagrid scratched his shaggy head. "Blimey, I forgot. Normally I just send them out for ingredients, like flour or fresh produce." "Go on then," Harry encouraged. "No one tells me these days," Hagrid grumbled, but he raised his voice. "Dee, come along now." In an instant, a house elf appeared at the doorway. He was draped in what looked suspiciously like a tea towel emblazoned with the Hogwarts crest, slung over his shoulders like a makeshift robe. Harry blinked twice before he was certain it really was a tea towel. The elf gave a polite bow. "Good afternoon, Master Hagrid, Master Harry, and you must be the lady, Miss Granger." "Afternoon, Dee," Hagrid called back. "We're starved. Bring us something good, please." Deedee's large eyes flickered with anticipation. With a discreet wave of his arms, the empty plates on the long wooden table vanished in a swirl of magic. Moments later, they reappeared, piled high with steaming roast beef, buttery potatoes, honey-glazed carrots, and half a dozen other favorites. "Just what we like," Harry said, grinning. Dee bowed again. Master Harry, Master Ron, Miss Hermione, I have noted all your preferences. Harry's brow lifted in surprise. Is Dobby all right? He asked gently, noticing something familiar in the elf's manner. Didi paused mid-bow. A faint smile flickered across his face. Dobby is well, sir. And with that, he set down the last plate of food and vanished as quietly as he had come, leaving the trio tuck into a very merry feast. Ron and Draco, standing off to the side, watched with keen interest. Chapter 390, Pansy Suddenly Returns Home. Dobby has always been an odd house elf. Over the summer, he intercepted Harry's letters without his master's permission. He claims it was for Harry's own safety. He even spoke of freedom, a concept other house elves fear as much as snakes and scorpions. Rumor now holds that Dobby has taken up residence at Hogwarts, and Harry can't help but feel uneasy about it. Before leaving, Dobby also vowed to keep an eye on Professor Riddle. Harry was still turning over Dobby's bold acts in his mind when one of Professor Riddle's own elves, Didi, cleared his throat nervously. Excuse me, sir, may I say something unpleasant about Dobby? Harry looked up. Didi's bat-like ears twitched as he spoke in a low, anxious voice. He's not like any house elf I've ever known. He treats all our traditions, our very honor, as if they meant nothing. Didi swallowed and glanced around before adding in a hushed tone, He even demanded a salary, sir, and he dared to question Master Riddle himself. Harry raised an eyebrow. So he caused trouble? Didi shut his eyes and looked ashamed. It's not that Master Riddle was harsh with him. It's just, Dobby refuses to obey certain orders. He wants freedom, sir. Freedom in the face of everything we've always believed in. Harry frowned, concern knitting his brow. Dobby's unconventional loyalty to Harry and his crusade for freedom were admirable, but meddling in Riddle's affairs could be dangerous. As Didi retreated, Harry found himself torn between gratitude for the elf's devotion and worry over the risks Dobby had taken, and those he might still face. After Dumbledore himself stepped forward, Dobby didn't look very pleased. His little face fell into a sorrowful frown, and Harry could almost sense a flicker of indignation. Dobby felt it unfair to escape punishment. But as a house elf, he wouldn't dream of questioning the headmaster's decision. That's for the best, Harry murmured, relieved. Once Dobby had ascertained that Hagrid and the others no longer required his help, he gave a courteous bow to everyone and vanished in a swirl of mist. Later, as Hagrid gnawed thoughtfully on a chicken leg, he turned to Harry and Ron. There are house elves, like that? He asked, eyebrows raised in genuine astonishment. Ron couldn't suppress a pleased grin. He'd once stood up for Dobby in much the same way, and seeing Hagrid's surprise made him feel oddly vindicated. Dobby's a bit unusual, isn't he? Ron observed, shaking his head with a fond sort of amusement. Oi, Hephaestus, fancy a chicken leg? Ron added, tossing his leftover drumstick into the hearth. Draco Malfoy nearby squatted down to shove another log onto the crackling fire. Meanwhile, Harry and Ginny sat close together on the bench, sharing a quiet smile as they watched the flames dance. After Hagrid had polished off enough wine and food to satisfy even a mountain troll, Ron, whose curiosity flared and faded faster than a snidget in flight, turned to him, watching as Hagrid meticulously picked bits of meat from his teeth. I swear, I've got 2 eyelids now, Hagrid said, blinking slowly. When I raise the second one, I can see every inch of the Forbidden Forest. You feel the water droplets, see the flowers opening, even notice the dust floating in the air, Hagrid went on, still sounding half as if in a dream. Flowers in winter? Ron scoffed, holding up his hand as if warding off a particularly irritating blast-ended scroot. Didn't you ever take herbology? Draco rolled his eyes. There are plenty of magical plants that bloom in winter, he said, sounding bored. I just didn't expect it either. Ron shrugged. Blame Hephaestus. I was so caught up in the mystery back there, I didn't stop to think. Hephaestus, who by some twist of magic or engineering carried chicken bones and splintered wood in his belly, shivered in confusion. Inside him, the brittle bones and shards of wood clicked and crackled against one another. How did the Plutonian dragons go extinct anyway? Hagrid asked, leaning forward as if the answer might drift in on the next puff of pipe smoke. Draco's expression shifted. They were too powerful, he said, eyes distant. But they're solitary creatures. They don't mate often, and when they do, the females aren't exactly nurturing mothers. He shrugged. Offspring are rare, and even rarer still is a clutch that survives long enough to hatch. Over time, they just dwindled away. A thoughtful silence fell across the table. Hagrid tapped his pipe against the edge of his saucer. Ron gave Hephaestus a wary glance, and Draco stared into his wine, lost in thoughts of dragons that no wizard had seen in centuries. They simply abandon their eggs, Hagrid said, shaking his head, and Plutonian dragons are so powerful and territorial they rarely even cross paths, let alone mate. It only makes their already low reproduction rate worse. He sighed, the disappointment clear on his face. After that, life at Hogwarts settled into an unusually quiet rhythm. Harry spent his days in the Gryffindor common room brewing potions, with Ginny happily by his side, passing him ingredients and taking notes. Meanwhile, Ron and Draco practically camped out at Hagrid's hut, eager to check on the newborn dragon Hephaestus. Normally, Draco would have been right beside Pansy, just as Harry was with Ginny, but 2 days after Hephaestus hatched, an owl arrived with urgent news for Pansy. She left Hogwarts at once, a single letter explaining that several of her relatives had died under mysterious circumstances. No dates, no causes, just an abrupt summons home. Draco was determined to follow her immediately, but at that very moment another letter arrived, this one bearing the Malfoy family seal. Inside, his father's commanding words put an end to any thought of departure. As the old saying goes, no one knows a son like his father. Lucius Malfoy must have anticipated Draco's every intention and ensured his compliance. Draco stabbed at his stake in the Great Hall, his expression dark. This whole thing feels off. Harry and Ron looked up from their plates. After a moment, Ron gave a slow nod, as if he'd already suspected as much. Draco wiped a fleck of juice from his lip before continuing. I finally met Pansy's relatives, those who are supposed to attend the funeral. They're all barely out of Hogwarts, not even 20 yet. He rolled his eyes, and Father still refuses to let me go with them. He says the funeral itself isn't dangerous, but I'm to remain here. Harry folded his arms, considering. You said all the older members of her family are dead, right? Draco leaned forward, elbows on the table. Every last one of them. Sounds like it's about inheritance, Harry said quietly. You're engaged to Pansy, but you're not officially married. You won't inherit her family name or fortune unless that's sealed by a proper ceremony. Pure-blood society is always careful about who gets what, especially when large estates and old titles are involved. Draco waved his hand dismissively. I know all that, believe me. It's just irritating that Father won't trust me to attend a funeral after everything. He slumped back in his seat, pushing his plate aside. Harry gave a sympathetic shrug. Better to stay here where you're safe, at least until you learn more. Draco glanced around the table, then sniffed theatrically. On a brighter note, what on earth are you brewing in the dungeons, Potter? You smell like Snape's cloak. Harry rolled his eyes. If you spend as much time around crushed unicorn horn and powdered moonstone as I have recently, you'd smell worse. Besides, I'll have you know Professor Snape himself complimented one of my drafts this morning. Draco smirked. Sure, Potter. Just don't blow up the classroom again, all right? Harry grinned. No promises. Ron chuckled, and the three friends returned to their meal, each lost in their own thoughts. Draco about his forbidden trip, Harry about his brewing successes, and Ron about how pleased Hagrid would be to hear none of them had been turned into frogs. This no one was allowed to speak of Moon City, not allowed, not on parchment. The moment anyone laid eyes on it, some strange enchantment buried the memory so deeply that they couldn't recall a single detail, let alone share it. Draco Malfoy cocked an eyebrow at Harry, sensing his friend's reluctance. What about the potion? He pressed. Harry hesitated, and before he could answer, Ron jumped in. It's a trade secret, Ron announced firmly. Harry bit back a grin of exasperation. Damn it, Ron. My big reveal is ruined again. It's not a trade secret, he protested. It is, Ron insisted, nodding toward the windows of Diagon Alley. Have you noticed all the modified Muggle gadgets lining the shelves? I'm combining a Muggle shampoo formula with a magical potion to brew something even better, just like our ancestors did to make their fortune. Harry leaned forward conspiratorially. Ginny's been complaining that her hair's always a mess. Ginny seized her chance. While Draco's attention flickered elsewhere, she shot both boys a fiery look. Then finish your research quick. I want to try it. Draco rubbed his temples and frowned at his reflection in a shop window. I just hope it actually works. He paused, running a hand through his hair as if testing its tangles. Otherwise, we'll all be in trouble. He worried that, as he grew older, his hairline would begin to recede just like his father's. Chapter 167, Changes in the Ministry of Magic, Part 1. Finny Dax stepped into the ministry elevator and examined his reflection for a moment. He drew in a steadying breath and pressed the button for the second floor. Even 6 years after graduating from Hogwarts, he still hadn't gotten used to pulling extra shifts over the Christmas holidays. Since the ministry had opened registration for modified Muggle items, the second floor, home to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, had become a madhouse. Its two main branches, the Office for the Prohibition of Misuse of Muggle Artifacts and the Auror Office, were jammed wall to wall with wizards eager to file their paperwork. The elevator was almost perpetually overfilled, forcing many Auror Office staff to abandon it altogether and rely on the Flu network instead. Today, though, Finny had a good reason to squeeze in. He was meeting a very special person he hadn't seen in years, his college girlfriend, Charlotte Austin. A Muggle-born witch, Charlotte now worked for Arcadian Registrations, a private firm that helps clients navigate the complex process of registering modified Muggle devices. Thanks to her unique upbringing, she was exceptionally good at translating between the magical and non-magical worlds, and Finny couldn't wait to see her again. Dax pushed open the two heavy oak doors and stepped into the Auror headquarters, an open office divided into a grid of cubicles, each one claimed by an Auror. His compartment lay straight ahead. The walls were plastered with wanted photos of dark wizards, just as they were in every other cubicle. When he'd first graduated, Dax remembers scanning those pictures every morning, filing his report, then spending his afternoons patrolling dragon-shaped dark corners of the wizarding world, always hoping to nab a notorious criminal and collect the hefty bonus that came with it. But those days were gone. It wasn't wariness that changed him, but circumstance. For nearly 3 years now, the great dark wizards had all but vanished. Even Nocturne Alley yielded only petty gangs and street thugs, nothing like the high-profile criminals he once hunted. Wizards like Carlo and Knott still eluded arrest, for they left behind no evidence, no trail to follow. Today was Christmas, officially a holiday, yet Dax's disappointment felt deeper than missing a day off. He hadn't found Austin, and the silence of the Auror office, bathed in festive decorations but hollow of leads, reminded him just how much the wizarding underworld had slipped through their fingers. I have to admit, lately I've begun to feel more like a security guard than an Auror. The dark wizards we've been hunting vanished around the exact moment the Skywalker Alchemy Workshop opened its doors. At first, I suspected something illicit brewing in that shop, but the more I looked into it, the more I became convinced the real culprit was Borgin and Burke. After all, Borgin and Burke have quietly reinvented themselves. They're no longer peddling cursed antiques. Now they import and sell pirated magical items, knock-off Horcrux cases, counterfeit self-stirring cauldrons, that sort of thing. I'm almost certain those missing dark wizards ended up there, buying supplies and laying low among the shop's murky clientele. Yet there's nothing we can do. Legally, Borgin and Burke run a perfectly legitimate business. They pay their taxes, their paperwork is spotless, and they've even started advertising in the Daily Prophet. If we raided their shop or froze their assets, the ministry would face an uproar, and those same dark wizards would simply melt back into the broader wizarding community, wreaking havoc once more. And who would be held responsible then? Truth be told, this stalemate has left me feeling like my wand's rusting away in my pocket. But I can't complain. The lull has meant peace for Britain's wizarding world. Non-Auror folk got used to seeing fewer dark wizards roaming the streets, and I relished that quiet. All that changed when Arthur Weasley was promoted. Ever since, it's been as though the war's back on. Case files keep piling up on my desk, and Aurors are back to midnight stakeouts and high-alert patrols. I can already feel the storm gathering on the horizon, and I have a sinking feeling we're about to face the darkest days we've seen in years. Every Auror's cubicle was equipped with a high-security door key, an upgrade only senior officials could issue. Before this innovation, Aurors relied entirely on the Floo network to come and go from the Ministry. In theory, a quick flick through a fireplace made commuting convenient. In practice, it was a beacon to every dark wizard listening in, leaving Aurors vulnerable to surveillance, or worse, ambush. Still, Fudge and his cronies couldn't have cared less. Their priority was comfort, a seamless entry and exit, free from the bother of dismounting a broom or mastering apparition under pressure. As far as they were concerned, those constant security breaches were a minor inconvenience, one that could be solved by any number of creative measures. If Aurors wanted clandestine fireplaces deep in the bowels of the Ministry, or a fleet of inflationary apparition licenses, why shouldn't they go ahead and find the money themselves? Dax sighed as he tapped the polished brass portkey on his desk. Weasley did a good job, he muttered, recalling how the newest Minister for Magic had finally authorized these keys. Each morning, after clocking in, Dax would secure the portkey around his wrist, then march out into his assigned district until quitting time. Only then, after hours of streets patrolled, trouble quieted, and reports filed, would he return the portkey to the crate by the desk and hand it off to the night shift. Night shift, a laughable term if you asked most Aurors. After sunset, the world belonged almost entirely to the dark wizards. Ministry lights grew dim, public wards thinned out, and shadows reigned. In those hours, Aurors didn't so much work as they held a vigil, hoping to outlast the unseen threats lurking in every alley. Dax exchanged his portkey for a steaming cup of coffee from the creaking kettle in the break room. He knew the risks better than anyone. But until the Ministry decided Aurors' safety mattered more than bureaucratic convenience, he'd keep walking those streets, door key at his belt, portkey at his wrist, standing guard while the rest of the wizarding world slept. Dax felt unusually at ease under the new arrangements. From his office window, he watched Aurors pacing the courtyard below, secure in the knowledge that today wasn't his turn on patrol. He didn't even need his door key. By the time he'd finished sorting through paperwork, the enchanted ceiling above him displayed a cheerful noonday sky of blue and white clouds, reminding him it was time for lunch. He glanced across the corridor. "Hey, Finny, what are we having today?" A short, portly man popped his head out of the next cubicle. "Now that the rain's finally cleared, I vote for New East. Their tomato-braised beef brisket and snow-topped coffee are unbeatable." Dax shrugged. "I'm not dining in the staff canteen on the 8th floor." Still, that was where he had to go to reach the exit. The two of them rose and made their way down the hallway. They soon entered a sweeping foyer. Dark, polished wooden floors stretched beneath a vast ceiling painted peacock blue and studded with shifting golden runes, a magical message board suspended high above them. Dax smiled, ready to step out into sunshine and good food. The great main hall of the Ministry of Magic was lined on both sides with gilded fireplaces, one to welcome arrivals, the other to bid departures. At mealtimes, an unassuming oak door would materialize next to the left fireplace. Beyond it lay the Ministry employees' dining room. Dick, a short, rotund wizard with perpetually reddened cheeks, blinking at the empty space in the center of the hall, exclaimed, "Finny, where did the Magic Brothers fountain statue go?" He missed the old ritual of dropping copper nuts into its basin to make a wish. Dax, a taller wizard with a rooked grin, slapped him on the shoulder. "Maybe the Ministry and St. Mungo's had a falling out," he teased. "You know the fountain's proceeds all go to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical injuries and sicknesses." "Come on, Dax, enough joking around. Could it just have been removed for repairs?" Dick asked, rubbing his chin. "Demolished, you mean?" Dax raised an eyebrow. Then he winked. "Don't forget, our Minister of Magic is a woman." At that, the truth sank in for Dick. The fountain hadn't been merely a statue. It was a gleaming tableau of pure gold. Male and female wizards standing shoulder to shoulder with centaurs, goblins, and house elves, a symbol of magical unity. And now it was gone. Water spouted from every part of the fountain statues, but the tallest figure dominated them all, a dignified wizard, his wand raised to the sky. At his side stood a beautiful witch, and around them gathered a noble centaur, a mischievous goblin, and a devoted house elf. The centaur, goblin, and elf all stared up at the two spellcasters with awe as silver streams of water soared into the air, spraying from the tip of the wizard's wand, the fletching of the centaur's arrow, the pom-pom of the goblin's hat, and even the house elf's elongated ears. "I see," Dick said, stepping forward. "The tallest statue shouldn't be a wizard at all. It needs to be a witch. An absolute imbecile. I haven't the faintest idea how to sort this out." "Lucky you're still in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement," came a sneering voice. A wizard with a cruel grin had clearly been eavesdropping on their conversation. "Surely you know that Arthur Weasley runs the very department your brother works in, and that Amelia Bones is the direct superior of your boss. And you?" He turned to Dick. Dick laughed scornfully, rolling his eyes. "Oh, and you, from the Department of Magical Creatures and Dragon Research and Regulation, expect to have any better insight than the rest of us?" He tapped his wand against his palm. He prided himself on being the ministry's biggest donor to the Gertie-Root Fountain. Who did this minor official think he was, to contradict him? "Tell me, do you truly grasp how much clout Arthur Weasley and Ms. Bones wield?" The afternoon sun glinted off the marble fountain at the heart of the ministry courtyard, casting long shadows across its elaborately carved figures. At its center stood 5 figures, witch, wizard, centaur, goblin, and house elf, all poised in perfect harmony around a bubbling basin. To passers-by, it was a bold statement, magical kind united as equals. But not everyone saw it that way. "It's ridiculously naive," Dax muttered, leaning in to examine the centaur's proud profile. "Witches and wizards side by side with centaurs, goblins, and, heaven help us, house elves as equals? We both know centaurs and goblins see themselves as superior to human magic." Dick folded his arms. "And look at that house elf," he said, nodding toward the small figure kneeling with an upturned face and a satisfied smile. "Since when have house elves been happy unless they're serving a wizard? She should be bowing, not grinning as if she's earned a day off." Dax snorted. "It's exactly the kind of whitewashing Cornelius Fudge loved, fashioning a picture of peace without doing the hard work of real reform." Dick's lips curved into a smug smile. "Real change takes courage. Remember what Ron Weasley and Amelia Bones did? They admitted the ministry's mistakes, tackled goblin grievances, granted house elves rights, practical steps, not statues." He tapped the fountain's base. "But now this statue's out, and nobody bats an eye at genuine progress." As they exchanged glances of shared disdain, a discreet cough made them turn. A young wizard, robes neatly pressed and posture alert, had clearly been listening. Dick stepped forward, extending a hand. "I'm Dick, and this is Dax. You've been watching us. What's your name?" The newcomer cleared his throat. "Gideon Larkspur." Dax brightened. "Welcome, Gideon. Why don't you join us for dinner? We'd value your perspective, especially if you've got ideas on how to push the ministry toward real reform rather than these hollow symbols." Gideon hesitated a moment. Then, intrigued, he offered a tentative smile. "I'd like that very much." Together, the 3 of them walked away from the fountain, already deep in conversation about the hard work still to come. Wayne leaned back in the private room of the New East Cafe, 2 junior officers across from him, hanging on his every word. He let out a low snort and set down his coffee. "All right," he said. "I'll give you some guidance. First things first. My name is Wayne." He paused, letting that settle in. "Now, I imagine you're wondering why you bust your tail all day, yet your rank hasn't changed in years. Meanwhile, some folks less talented than you keep moving up the chain. Why do you think that is?" Dax, the youngest of the pair, couldn't hold back. "Why?" Wayne reached for a slice of roast beef, chewed thoughtfully, then wiped his mouth on a napkin. "Because you haven't learned to tailor your work to the people with real power. Back when Fudge ran the Ministry of Magic, its reputation was the top priority. If you could write a solid report, build a little buzz around yourself, and accidentally slip a glowing article into the newspapers, one that made the ministry look good, you'd get promoted." He tapped E-table. Fudge did the exact same thing for himself. He made everyone believe he always followed Dumbledore's lead, Dumbledore being the one person no one dared question. By positioning himself as the loyal follower of the most respected wizard in Britain, Fudge cemented his own rise to minister. Wayne leaned forward, eyes blazing. "That's the game. If you want to climb, you have to learn to play it." "I've got it. Arthur Weasley's on the same page," Dick announced, rapping his knuckles against the table for emphasis. "He's been Dumbledore's man from the very start. Remember how Cornelius Fudge ended up disgraced? All it took was one letter from Dumbledore, pointing out that Fudge wasn't measuring up. Wayne leaned forward, eyes gleaming. So here's the key. Stop worrying about second-guessing Arthur Weasley or Madam Bones. Figure out what Dumbledore wants, then position yourself to deliver it. Dax's cheeks flushed with excitement. In that moment, he felt as if he'd uncovered the secret to every promotion and pay raise within the ministry. Exactly. People can learn new tricks, he said. Especially you, Dax. Dax nodded eagerly. Just like when I caught wind of the Triwizard Tournament and realized Hagrid, Dumbledore's staunch ally, would be in charge of the Dragon Challenge. I discreetly recommended the 4 breeds I knew he'd want. The Chinese Fireball, Hungarian Horntail, Swedish Short Snout, and Welsh Green. All part of the plan, and not a word escaped. Wayne stroked his chin, brimming with pride. The 3 of them exchanged satisfied smiles, each thinking, we're on the path to the top. Later, after dinner, they stepped into the grand staircase elevator. As Dax reached for the button to the 2nd floor and Wayne for the 4th, the doors slid open, and an unexpected figure slipped inside with them. Wayne, nicknamed Busy Huey for his habit of piling on tasks, reached out and patted Shuyi on the shoulder. Hey, what's up? Shuyi worked in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, alongside the Centaur Liaison Office, the Werewolf Capture Project Team, the Werewolf Registration Office, the Werewolf Support Services Section, the Ghoul Rangers, and the ever-hectic Fire Dragon Research and Restriction Bureau. He'd been transferred there as a demotion after offending someone with clout. Determined to prove his worth, or at least keep himself occupied, he'd volunteered for every phantom assignment that came his way. That unending hustle earned him Wayne's teasing nickname, even though Shu Yi's trademark expression was a wry, bitter half-smile. Today, however, that familiar grimace had been replaced by something else entirely. I got promoted, Shu Yi announced, his eyes shining as he threw his arms around Wayne. Wayne stumbled back, confusion written all over his face. Promoted? Wow? He blurted. Over the past weeks, Shu Yi had been popping up at Hogwarts, sitting in on discussions with Dumbledore, helping Hagrid with crate inspections, but no one at the Ministry had hinted that these visits would lead to anything more than a passing courtesy. Shu Yi glanced up and down the corridor, then leaned in conspiratorially. Hogwarts requested me as their new Ministry liaison, he whispered. That's why. Are any of you familiar with the names Avery, Greengrass, Shafiq, and Roar? Shu Yi asked before Wayne could get a word in. Of course, Wayne said, rolling his eyes. Those 4 pureblood families practically run the Ministry. Their young wizards hold half the real power there. They've only been out of school a few years, but they've already dashed past us in every promotion. We should have moved up ages ago, if not for them, Wayne complained. Dax and Dick nodded in agreement. But, you know what's strange? Shu Yi pressed. They're all dead. Wayne glanced at the others. All 4 of them? The heirs to those great families? Exactly, Shu Yi said. One morning they're alive. By afternoon we hear about their funerals, and the Ministry immediately shut the case. No suspects, no trial, just a quick service with every pure-blood family in attendance. Then the whole thing was over. They've cleaned house, Wayne said, half to himself. Those slots are open now, if we dare apply. Shu Yi's eyes glistened. I did apply. They looked at my record, my years of dedication, and today I got promoted, just like that. I need to send in my petition, Dax declared. Me too, Dick agreed. The 3 of them exchanged excited looks. Dax chuckled. So, who do you think did us this little favor? Wayne grinned, conviction shining in his eyes. Dumbledore, obviously. Dick leaned back in his chair, frowning. But they haven't had a chance to do anything really dangerous yet, he protested, folding his arms across his chest. Why all the fuss? Bruce Wayne gave him a sidelong glance, the faintest hint of a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. You're not reading the Daily Prophet, are you? Dick rolled his eyes. I skim it when I have time, sure, but the headlines have been quiet. What am I missing? Bruce set down his tea with a soft clink on the saucer. There's talk about a young man named Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle, Dick echoed. He frowned. Isn't that... Wayne's lips curved into a knowing smile. Exactly. Rumor has it he's Dumbledore's illegitimate son. Dick's eyebrows shot up. Dumbledore's son? You're kidding. Not at all, Bruce replied evenly. It's precisely because of Riddle's emergence that the old headmaster's been so anxious about ministry politics lately. In years past, he never paid the ministry much mind. Dick shook his head, absorbing the implication. So this Riddle kid might be the real reason Dumbledore's reputation has shifted. But he's still just a student, isn't he? Bruce poured himself another cup of tea, eyes distant. For now. But power and ambition run deep in that family. We shouldn't underestimate what might happen once he finds his footing. He paused, taking a measured sip. Keep an eye on him, Dick. I have a feeling he's going to stir up trouble faster than anyone expects. Chapter 393. Side Effects. For Ryan, mornings at the North Sea and evenings in Kongwu have become as routine as breathing. In the few precious quiet hours between missions, he moves farther and faster than any conventional traveler could dream. One moment, he's overlooking the mist-shrouded turrets of Hogwarts in the Scottish Highlands. The next, he's sipping espresso at a sidewalk cafe in Paris. On Earth, there are no distances Ryan cannot cross. Today at noon, he materialized in the Ministry of Magic's outdoor elevator, stepping into the little cafe he'd installed there, an incongruous but charming spot facing a bright red telephone booth. Ryan had set it up as a cover for his real research, studying wizardkind up close. And true to form, he'd stumbled across one of his favorite, if most elusive subjects, Finny Dax. Finny sat at a wrought iron table with two other wizards, voices low but animated. As Ryan ordered a latte, scraps of their conversation drifted into his ears. They spoke of Gellert Grindelwald, of Nurmengard, and of the young witches and wizards who'd briefly thrown in their lot with Voldemort before he was vanquished. Ryan paused, cupping his coffee. For a moment it struck him. Why had Grindelwald executed those fledgling Death Eaters, teens who'd never done more than swear an oath, rather than imprison them as he'd done with so many opponents? Everyone knew Grindelwald hated needless killing. That was the very reason he'd erected Nurmengard, filling it with foes he intended to debate and, if possible, convert. He pulled up a chair. "Mind if I join you?" he asked Finny, who looked up in surprise. The other two wizards barely noticed as Ryan slid in beside them. "What brings you back to London, Ryan?" Finny said, a trace of a smile twitching at his mouth. He'd sensed Ryan's presence long before the teleportation signature flared. Ryan let his eyes drift to the red booth flashing past the elevator doors. "Your remarks just now, they made me rethink Grindelwald's motives." Finny raised an eyebrow. The other wizards leaned in. "I get why he created Nurmengard," Ryan continued, "to contain his enemies without bloodshed. But those kids, why kill them? They'd never really harmed anyone." Silence fell. Then one of the men spoke softly. "Because sometimes imprisonment isn't enough. Those young wizards might have grown into a new generation of terror." "But couldn't their souls have been salvaged?" Ryan pressed, stirring his latte. Grindelwald claimed he wanted unity among wizards, despised violence. If so, executing them seems contrary. Finny traced the rim of his glass. "Not all threats announce themselves early. Crush them at the root, and there's no chance they'll sprout again." The elevator dinged open on the ministry landing. Ryan rose, mind racing. In a world of spies and secret wars, he recognized the logic even as he mourned its cruelty. Some ideologies thrived on total eradication. By summoning those teenagers to trial and death, Grindelwald ensured no one would ever doubt the cost of standing against him. Ryan stepped out, coffee cup in hand, carrying with him the bitter taste of a lesson learned, that even a man renowned for mercy can, in certain lights, choose the harshest remedy. And when that choice lingers in the heart of power, its side effects can echo across generations. This time, Grindelwald changed his tactics. Although the outcry from the other young masters, apart from Dax, was vehement, their objections weren't entirely baseless. Every one of Grindelwald's assassinations had been carried out with Dumbledore in mind. In his eyes, so long as these conservative upstarts occupied key positions, they would stall, or even reverse the reforms he knew the wizarding world desperately needed. He also understood that Dumbledore, by nature a kind and merciful man, would never resort to the ruthless measures Grindelwald deemed necessary. Unbeknownst to him, Tom Riddle lurked in the shadows, but Grindelwald paid him no mind. Instead, he watched as the deaths of those young cancers did exactly to he'd intended. They shifted the Ministry of Magic onto a new course. Talented, earnest officials, people like Huey, are now rising through the ranks, breathing fresh energy into an institution long weighed down by bureaucracy. From now on, Grindelwald declared, I'll turn my efforts toward more constructive work. We've removed our greatest obstacles. There's no longer any need to fear getting our hands dirty. I feel like I'm reliving the day I graduated. On the second-floor corridor, Dax paused to watch Wayne and Huey disappear up the spiral staircase toward the fourth floor. As they went, hope lit up Dax's features. Long live Dumbledore, he called after them, then glanced up at the enchanted ceiling, where a golden sun was slowly climbing above a painted horizon. In the Ravenclaw dormitory, it was the final full day of the Christmas holidays. Harry sat cross-legged in front of a gently bubbling cauldron, his scarlet-rimmed eyes bright with feverish anticipation. He murmured a string of incantations under his breath, and the potion before him, once a thick, curry-colored sludge, gradually cleared to a shimmering silver. "All right," he whispered, leaning closer. "If I drink this every day for 100 days, it will completely replace my blood. My whole body will change." He rubbed at the dark circles under his eyes, feeling a tremor of excitement run through him. From the doorway came Hermione's worried voice. "Harry, are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked. "It sounds dangerous." Harry straightened, forcing a grin. "I know it's a risk, but think of what it could do." Hermione stepped inside, her brows knitting together. 100 days in a row? That's a lot of commitment, and a lot of magic we don't fully understand. He sighed, turning back to the cauldron. "I've thought about it non-stop. This might be the only way I can." "It's just so troublesome," Hermione interrupted, tone gentle but firm. "Promise me you'll reconsider?" Harry closed his eyes, hand resting on the edge of the cauldron. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hiss of steam. Then he opened his eyes, resolve shining through the exhaustion. "I promise I'll be careful," he said quietly, "but I have to do this." Hermione only nodded, worry still in her gaze. And as Harry lifted a small glass vial toward his lips, the winter sunlight glinting off the enchanted ceiling above whispered of impossible possibilities and of the dangers waiting just beyond. "You'll have to be up by 6 tomorrow morning," Ron warned, folding his arms as he glared at the translucent vial in Harry's hand. "Then you'll perform that ridiculous dance, recite the entire spell without a single slip, and trust me, there's no room for error." Harry frowned. "What happens if I mess up?" Ron's lips curled with impatience. "They'll postpone the ritual, and you'll be back to drinking this foul excuse for a potion another day. Supposedly, after you get it right, you'll feel better. At least, that's the promise." He shook his head. "Honestly, we've got distilled water for healing, enchantments to sharpen your senses, and a dozen protective spells lined up. None of those require you to guzzle this." He leaned forward, peering into Harry's flask with disgust. The liquid looked like distilled unicorn blood, too clear, too perfect. But the real horror lay in the ingredients Harry could see bobbing in the depths: fresh slugs, toad livers, mouse eyes. And who knew what else had been added? Harry's stomach churned. "It's supposed to replace my blood, Ron." Ron slapped the side of the flask. "Then they're madder than I thought. You could brew a dozen harmless charms in half the time. But if you insist on this, just be ready for a very early start." "It's more than that," the disembodied voice insisted. "This potion will keep you in peak condition at all times. You'll be impervious to disease, your overall strength will increase, your spell resistance will soar, and your reaction speed, already faster than any ordinary witch or wizard's, will become even sharper." Harry exchanged a grin with Ron. "Sounds like a bargain to me. No dawn wake-ups for first draughts, no silly dances or spell chants. All I have to do is drink this stuff?" He waved his wand over the crucible. The silvery, translucent liquid pulsed at the tip, then poured smoothly into a row of glass vials. Harry nodded. "Perfect." Lifting one vial, he emptied it in a single gulp. A surge of cold burst through him from throat to heart, then rippled outward into every limb, right to the tips of his hair. It felt less like swallowing a liquid and more like plunging into icy water. "What just happened?" Harry asked, voice shaky. He glanced at Ron, who was staring at him in stunned silence. You're glowing," Ron finally managed, eyes wide. Harry looked down. A soft silvery light shimmered beneath his skin, casting a faint aura around him. Ron blinked, then swallowed hard. I must have imagined it, he muttered, but his gaze stayed fixed on Harry's faintly luminescent form. Maybe I can do even more. Harry shook his head, his tone indifferent, and flexed his fingers. Immediately he sensed a new precision and sensitivity coursing through them. He weighed his wand in his hand, then, almost on a whim, let it rest on the tip of his index finger and thumb. To his satisfaction, it spun freely at his fingertips before coming to a steady stop. "Merlin's pants!" Ron burst out. "How did you?" Harry merely let his hand drop, and the wand slipped from his fingertips. With a casual gesture, he caught it by the handle as it fell. "Looks like the potion's transformation is already taking effect," he said with a grin. He glanced over at the row of potion bottles lined up on the windowsill, each one catching the sunlight and gleaming like a Quidditch champion's trophy. Now, what could Dudley possibly use to compete? "Aha!" said a clear voice from behind. Harry turned quickly, only to find nobody there, but out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Ryan standing a few feet away, holding one of the bottles up to the light. "Ryan," Ron croaked, his voice unsteady and his face ashen. He looked more nervous than even Harry did. "Is Harry's potion all right?" Ryan gave the vial a careful tilt and held it against the window's stream of sunlight. He smiled. "It's perfect." "How could there possibly be a problem?" Harry asked with a confident wave. "Potions are my specialty. Consider it handled." "But," Ryan's voice trailed off, uncharacteristically hesitant. Ron's brow furrowed. "But what?" Ryan exchanged a quick glance with Harry before leaning in. "The salamander blood you bought, its purity is unprecedented. It's far stronger than anything we've worked with before." Harry frowned. "Stronger? Why is that an issue?" Ryan sighed. "Advances in breeding have made today's salamanders almost a different species from those of old. Their blood carries immense potency, but it isn't without side effects. Think of it like Felix Felicis. Not dangerous, but it can make you excessively confident. Arrogant, even." Harry bit his lip, concern flickering in his eyes. Seeing this, Ryan managed a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, it won't harm you. Just expect a bit more bravado than usual." Another chapter will be posted later today. P.S. Thanks to Taishi Yumiksu for the monthly ticket and to everyone else for your recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 394, Failed Experiment. Felix Felicis is the elixir of good fortune. Once you drink it, everything you attempt seems destined to succeed, at least until the potion's effects wear off. As an exceptional potions student, Harry knows this well. Brewing Felix Felicis demands painstaking time and a labyrinth of precise, delicate steps. By comparison, the blood substitute potion he now holds seemed almost trivial. Its main challenges were securing the rare ingredients and mastering the complex magic, especially the ritual dance and precise incantations. Without those, it would amount to nothing more than a fleeting boost in bodily sensitivity. And yet in that moment, Harry's heart lurched. He felt it again, a subtle but unmistakable ripple of fate-tugging luck coursing through him. The very potion he'd dismissed as rudimentary, so inferior to Felix Felicis, was displaying the same hallmark side effect. Oh my God, but it's not in any textbook. Even with his growing confidence, Harry couldn't keep the panic from shooting through his chest. He'd overlooked something, and now he had no idea what would happen next. You know why no potion master ever recommends Felix Felicis as an everyday elixir? Its side effects are brutal. Dizziness, reckless impulses, even a kind of dangerous arrogance. One taste, and no self-respecting witch or wizard will risk a second. Yet here you are, Harry Potter, faced with downing 100 straight doses of a potion whose side effects rival those of liquid luck itself. Morning light slanted through the curtains as Ryan nudged you awake. "Do you know why we're up at 6?" he asked, but instead of waiting for an answer, he began twirling his wand between his fingers. Your groggy gaze followed the motion. The wand was exquisite, ivory white, shot through with delicate, swirling veins like living runes. "Why?" you mumbled, your head pounding. You had no idea. You weren't even sure how you'd gotten to this point in the first place. Ryan finally stowed the wand in his pocket. "Simple. The sooner you're up, the sooner your body can start breaking down those side effects." He shrugged as if that settled everything. "Your system can handle it. Just get moving." You sat up and drew a deep breath. A dull throb behind your eyes reminded you of the 100 doses waiting at breakfast. Still, Ryan's confidence was contagious. "Okay," you said, forcing a grin. "Give it 2, maybe 3 hours, and I'll be back to normal." For a moment, you believed him. Ryan's parting words still echoed in the dimly lit room. "The potion takes about an hour to fully process," he'd warned. "Do yourself a favor. Don't let Ginny see you until then." Harry frowned, but the familiar, confident grin wouldn't budge. Ryan's eyes narrowed. "That smile's ridiculous," he muttered, and in an instant he was gone. "Do I really look that stupid?" Harry asked, bewildered. Ron finally stomped forward, having been sidelined during Harry's entire exchange with the mysterious Ryan. "Honestly," he said, shaking his head, "if I weren't so polite, I'd knock that grin right off you." As Ginny's big brother and as Harry's friend, he felt obligated to deliver a proper scolding. "You'd better lie down and rest. And make sure Ginny doesn't barge in here and catch you pulling that face," Ron added, steering Harry toward the door. Harry flopped onto his bed, still wearing that infuriating grin. "But why didn't the handbook mention this side effect?" he complained. Ron crossed his arms. "The book clearly says to be up at 6 tomorrow. Besides, you might want to sort that expression out before Ginny wakes up." With that, he left Harry alone in the quiet room, the soft glow of the lanterns dancing across Harry's bemused features. "It's just to give you time to be stupid." Ron rolled his eyes at the biting remark, but the words lingered in the corridors of the castle. As he departed, Ryan halted mid-step, a flash of realization striking him. Harry's proposal, an experiment they'd all but forgotten, had long deserved their attention. Deep beneath the ancient oaks of Nottingham Forest, the castle's lowest vault lay cloaked in shadows and rumor. Its flagstone walls were lined with Goobler fairy fires, their milky white flames dancing in alcoves and niches. In the dim light, rows of black cauldrons stood like sentinels on the cold floor. There was no roaring hearth here. Instead, each pot rested on a glowing orange and yellow rune, bathing the room in a gentle, comforting warmth. Within every cauldron, a golden liquid swirled and frothed. Bubbles rose and burst on the surface, scattering droplets that flickered like darting fish, yet not a single drop escaped its brimming vessel. From a haze of silvery mist that wound through the air, a cloaked figure materialized. He knelt before the largest cauldron, then straightened and pressed a palm against the polished metal panel set into the wall. Reflected in its brass sheen, his face shone with excitement. "My lord," he reported, voice steady, "the magical array has performed flawlessly. We have finally mastered the most challenging brew, the Felicity Potion." Ryan stepped forward, surveying the neatly stacked flasks that glowed with their precious elixir. He let out a soft sigh. "If only replenishing hope were as simple as summoning despair," he murmured. "It appears that filling a heart with joy demands far more than a few tears of sorrow." He paused, eyes lingering on the golden depths of the cauldrons. "Nevertheless," he added, "we now hold in our hands the power to grant genuine happiness, if only we choose to wield it." The vial of despair potion pressed against Ryan's lips was no ordinary poison. It was the very same brew that Voldemort had stored in the stone basin at the center of his inferi-infested island. Over years of dark experimentation, Voldemort had perfected it into an eternal potion, one that never ran dry and never lost its potency. Here's how it worked. The basin's original draught served as a perpetual source, drawing on the endless agony of the surrounding inferi. These restless corpses, bound to their shells for eternity, leaked their torment into the liquid, regenerating whatever volume was consumed. In theory, the loop could be broken. If someone managed to swallow every last drop in a single gulp, the source would collapse. But Voldemort had been too cunning to allow that. He'd hidden a second reservoir of the same potion in the secret chamber where he stashed his locket Horcrux. Only by drinking from the basin could one shatter the link to that hidden cache, at which point the locket would appear. As soon as the Horcrux was removed, the stone basin, now reduced to a mere conduit, would seize fresh pain from the inferi and begin brewing anew. This was the dark genius of the eternal potion, a self-sustaining cycle of anguish, concealed beneath a simple stone basin, its secrets rooted in Voldemort's most exquisite knowledge of magic and potion-craft. Ordinary potions don't need a person's feelings to become everlasting elixirs, so long as they're brewed within a strong magical field, the ambient aura generated by any living wizard. Only the most potent brews, like the potion of fortune or its dark counterpart, the potion of despair, demand genuine emotional energy because they tap into slippery, abstract concepts. God, aren't Jack's emotions registering at all? Ryan muttered. Then he realized with a jolt. The stubborn vials had already leached every ounce of Jack's feelings. If that were truly the only power source, why hadn't the draft solidified into permanent potions? Ryan's mind raced to the obvious answer. The House Elves. As a magically gifted, deeply emotional race, they served his pure-blood family better than any other. Under his command, they would gladly pour every drop of their fervor into the cauldrons, supplying more than enough emotional charge to bind an elixir eternally. With their help, concocting a true, everlasting potion of fortune, or any other emotion-driven draft, would be as effortless as willing yourself lucky. That, Ryan decided, was his next move. Ryan stood before the carved stone visage set into the laboratory wall, torchlight flickering in its hollow eyes. He drew a steadying breath. Master, according to my detailed observations, the emotional charge is more than adequate, the formula itself is sound, and the elixir even shows signs of permanent stabilization. Yet at the final step, it still collapses. The face on the wall furrowed its brows, the grooves around its mouth twisting into displeasure. So in the end, the elixir's potency only improved marginally, and all that emotional investment was for nothing? Another curse? Ryan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. It can't be the old man losing control of his power again. He's far too unpredictable to have engineered something like this. He swallowed hard, the words escaping as a bitter whisper. Chapter 395, The Three Goddesses of Fate. How did a wizard, born a god capable of warping reality with a thought, fall to the point where he can't even cast a single spell without a wand? How did he come to be chained by the very muggle world he once loomed over? The answer, Ryan explained, lies in the deeds of the six ancient ones. When the first wizards emerged, a select few truly were omnipotent, much as modern-blooded wizards believe themselves to be. Yet each of those original sorcerers had a unique strength, forged by temperament, conviction, or even their lineage. Some bent the powers of the heavens to their will, others mastered self-transformation. A rare handful could manipulate time as easily as breathing. But after ages lost to history, a faction of these godlike magi decided their gifts were too perilous to endure. They cast dreadful curses upon every wizard born thereafter. My realm spans the fissures of time. Dare your kind trespass? Flames are my limbs. Invoke my name from the void if you must. Within shadows I hold court. To raise the dead is the gravest of blasphemies. A few of these curses weakened and fell away, but most took hold, and in doing so, they reduced once unstoppable gods to mere wand-wielders. Ryan had encountered this before, spells that should have worked, inexplicably failing at the last moment. Today was no different. A chill crept into his gaze, as though his eyes held an entire cosmos within them. The void magic he wielded wove itself into a silken web around his mind, probing ever deeper into his consciousness. Then across the vast canvas of the galaxy, a colossal deity outlined in starlight cracked open its eyes. Destiny belongs to us, it intoned. Those who reach for fate will. In that instant, Ryan shed his illusions and revealed his true self. From the river of destiny itself, three voices poured out, aged yet radiant, ethereal yet sensuous. They spoke in unison, their tones weaving past, present, and future into a single thread. The three goddesses of fate. They really do prey on the weak and tremble before the strong, Ryan muttered, half to himself. These ancient echoes never missed a chance to meddle. He'd been monitoring their schemes for some time. The last time he'd encountered their interference, he'd hunted down Weber Boot, better known in the Muggle world as William Seward Weber. Back then, the dreaded curse of prognosis had remained dormant, for it only targeted ordinary wizards who dared push beyond their limits. Confronted with someone on the brink of divinity like Ryan, it had simply looked the other way. The curse is so abhorrent that ordinary spells, and even Voldemort's most lethal hexes, simply dissipate when their caster dies. But against those unholy god-wizards who've already cheated death, it endures forever, unless they choose to lift it themselves. I was wrong to blame the Department of Mysteries, Ryan sighed, pacing the length of the circular chamber. With so many Elder Sixes tinkering in their labs, It was no wonder they never produced results. He raised his white wand and murmured a soft incantation. From its tip poured a torrent of golden motes, arcing into the ancient magic circle inscribed on the floor. Inside the bronze crucible at the circle's center, the molten contents began spiraling inward, as though a bottomless hole yawned beneath them. The glow intensified until Ryan gave a final, decisive flick of his wrist. Done. Felixir, Eternal Edition. He announced the name deliberately, then flicked his wand again. Instantly, 5 immaculate crystal vials materialized in midair. From each vial's neck gushed the golden elixir, filling them to the brim. "Jack!" Ryan called. In an instant, the house elf Jack appeared at his side, eyes alight with fanatical devotion. Despite his eager posture, Jack couldn't help a fleeting glance of resentment toward the looming form of the Lord God, seated in shadow at the chamber's far end. "Master," Jack said, inclining his head, "shall I prepare them as before?" Ryan nodded. "Yes, dispatch them at once, and be discreet." Jack snapped to attention, clutching the 5 crystal vials. As he vanished in a swirl of brackish green smoke, Ryan turned back to the smoldering magic circle, determination etched on his face. The Eternal Edition of Felixir was complete, and its power would change everything. Ryan gave a curt nod, and in the blink of an eye Jack vanished, still clutching the 5 crystal vials of the Elixir of Fortune. Those bottles now belonged to Penelope, Kate, Fleur, Hermione, and Luna. Any side effects from overindulging in the potion? They needn't worry. To them, Ryan had become something between a deity and a guardian angel. His power would automatically purge any lingering toxins. And no matter how much luck the elixir bestowed, they couldn't channel it into conjuring a Shura field. With Ryan's subtle guidance and blessing, fate itself bent to his design. But he made a point of not extending the same favor to Harry and his friends. If he did, Harry Potter, the true savior, would collapse into a mere puppet show. And what fun would that be? Having settled matters, Ryan stepped back into the gray veil, re-emerging moments later in the silent dormitory. Out on the Quidditch pitch, Harry was already testing his newly enhanced body. Ginny at his side, they soared beneath the afternoon sky in a spirited trial of speed and skill. Chapter 7. A Misty Morning Surprise. Ron had spent the past weeks studying the forging techniques Hephaestus revealed in Moon City under Draco's curious gaze, so he could pull off the perfect surprise for Fred and George. Early the next morning, long before anyone else stirred, he put his plan into motion. By 6 o'clock, Harry was already up for his medicine and exercises. Ron, however, was on a different schedule. Thanks to Ginny's inside information, he knew exactly when the twins' return train would pull into Hogsmeade Station. 7 o'clock sharp. He wrapped himself in a thick fur cloak, tucked his wand into a leather glove, and stepped out into the pre-dawn chill. A swirl of mist clung to the ground, and somewhere high above, Ryan hovered unseen in the haze, as though tethered to Ron's fate. Only Ron Weasley would go to such lengths, Ryan thought with a hint of admiration. Instead of waiting at Hogwarts' main gate or shadowing the carriage road, Ron chose a bolder approach. He would intercept the train itself. Silently, he left the castle, followed the winding lakeside path, and made his way toward the carriage lane leading down to Hogsmeade. Every step carried him closer to the moment he had rehearsed in his mind, when Fred and George would step off the train, unsuspecting, and find themselves at the receiving end of Ron's most elaborate prank yet. He slipped through the ornate wrought iron gates, passing rows of tall stone pillars crowned with snarling winged boars. After what felt like forever weaving through brambles, he finally crouched at the edge of a small, forgotten platform in the woods. A scarlet steam engine sat silently on the tracks beside it. One by one, familiar students clambered down from the carriage onto the empty platform. Heart-pounding, Ron scanned every face for Fred and George. He didn't notice the mud caking his robes or the gritty black soil under his fingernails. Excitement had banished all sense of discomfort. He still remembered how it felt to be stood up by the twins on that blind date. Since then, he'd poured every ounce of hurt and resentment into mastering a single, powerful incantation from the magic of emotions. He'd thought about ambushing them at the Hogwarts gates, but expected they'd be prepared for him there. Instead, he dragged himself deeper into the forest, far beyond where anyone would think to look, and set his trap here. They'd never guess he'd come this far for revenge. And he was ready. Furthermore, in their plan, only the four of them, Percy, Ginny, and the two of them, would know exactly when they'd arrive. That way, when faced with an ordinary spell, nobody would instinctively dodge. Chapter 396, Ron's Revenge. Casting a spell usually demands your full attention, and, in most cases, a clear verbal incantation. You can't be speaking one charm out loud and simultaneously casting another in your mind. If that were possible, silent magic would be pointless. Imagine an Auror mouthing the levitation charm while mentally channeling Avada Kedavra. His opponent would brace for something harmless, only to be struck down by a killing curse. Dueling manuals stress the same thing. Keen ears are as vital as a steady wand, because recognizing an incantation the moment it's spoken gives you the split seconds you need to counterattack or defend. Ron had that principle at the forefront of his mind as he crept through the swirling mist toward Fred and George Weasley. On a day like today, a routine weather charm would raise no eyebrows. They'd hear the incantation and assume it was nothing more than a harmless breeze, or at worst, a bit of light, fog-clearing magic. Through the haze, Ron picked out three figures almost at once. The Weasleys' trademark flaming red hair cut through the gray like beacons. His own hair, of course, was hidden beneath his hood, leaving him perfectly positioned to strike without warning. George nudged his twin as they strode along the edge of the Homping Willows clearing. "When we get to Hogwarts," he murmured, "let's drop by the Hufflepuff common room first and let Ron wander off on his own." Fred grinned. "Perfect, although I don't fancy what Ronnie's going to pull on us in return." Percy, lagging behind, shot them a reproachful look. "Honestly, it's time you two grew up a bit." Fred and George exchanged a mischievous glance and laughed, only to find themselves turning onto the narrow forest path moments later. Then a single word, shouted from the shadows, froze them in their tracks. Petrificus totalis. At the sound of that spell, a rush of memories slammed into both brothers. The suffocating tightness of tangled limbs, the unwelcome brush of someone's hands, the panic of being pinned, and the rage of being left alone in darkness. Flashes of rough grips and sudden collisions played through their minds like a nightmarish slideshow. Their legs snapped together. With an audible thud, both twins collapsed to their knees and stiffened, unable to move or even cry out. A voice they knew all too well echoed from just beyond the oak trees. "Say cheese!" Ron Weasley stepped into view, wand still raised, clearly he hadn't used Lumos, and produced a small muggle camera from his robe pocket. He aimed it at the frozen twins and clicked off a rapid series of snapshots. Percy spun around in disbelief. "Ron, what on earth are you doing?" Ron gave a self-satisfied chuckle and lowered the camera. "Now you know exactly how it feels." Fred glared at him, teeth clenched, every muscle refusing to obey. "Release us this instant, Ronald." George muttered between clenched jaws, "You've crossed the line, mate." Ron flicked his eyebrows in mock sympathy. "Oh, come on. It's just payback. Besides, this curse wears off in about 60 seconds. With that, he slipped the camera back into his robes. Percy shook his head, half exasperated, half amused, as a faint tremor began to return to Fred and George's limbs. Slowly, carefully, the twins stood. Fred rubbed his shoulders, scowling. "Fine, you got us." George shot Ron a sideways look. "Truce?" Ron extended his hand with an impish grin. George clasped it, then gave his friend a curt nod. Fred let out an aggravated sigh. "All right, let's get to school before anyone else decides to teach us lessons." Ron pocketed his wand and fell in step beside them. "Lead the way, fellows, and watch your backs. Payback's a two-way street." Despite the adrenaline still coursing through them, the tension between the four brothers eased as they resumed their walk toward Hogwarts, each nursing fresh wounds to pride, and all wondering when the next prank war would begin. Chapter text. "Clean up!" Percy barked, switching his wand into position. "Scourgify." In an instant, the mud and grime that had caked Ron's robes vanished, as though erased by an invisible sponge. Percy leveled a steely gaze at his younger brother. "Where did you get that camera?" Ron smoothed down his now pristine robes and glanced at his clean hands. "Harry gave it to me." Percy's brow furrowed. "Don't you think what you did back there was—" "I think they needed a lesson," Ron cut in, flipping his hair back and inspecting the smudged lens of his camera with a pleased smile. Percy glanced over to Bill, who stood a short distance away with arms crossed, then back at Fred and George, still sprawled limply on the ground. "Bill and I heard about what they pulled in Egypt," he said softly. "Now explain to me exactly how you managed that trick." Ron tapped the side of his nose. "I overheard Harry practicing a new Lumos variation, Lumos Maxima, I think he called it. I worked out my own twist on the spell." "And you're certain there won't be any side effects?" Percy asked, concern lacing his tone. "They're still my brothers," Ron replied with a shrug. "A few sparks won't do them any lasting harm." Percy shook his head, half in exasperation, half in awe. "You've really changed, Ronald." Ron spread his fingers, lifting the camera toward the afternoon light. "Only enough to keep them on their toes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have these photos to distribute all over Hogwarts." He hoisted his bag over one shoulder, then turned on his heel and sprinted away, the camera swinging at his side. Percy watched him go, wand lowered, as the echoes of Ron's laughter faded across the Quidditch pitch. Ryan hovered in the cloud-like mist, a wry smile playing at his lips. To him, Ron's new spell was nothing less than a fully immersive first-person movie of any scene, far superior to the enchanted cinema Ryan ran in Diagon Alley. In his theaters, viewers could project their own thoughts into the film, but always from an outside perspective, never truly inhabiting the hero. This enchantment, by contrast, let you slip inside the protagonist like a living pensieve, experiencing every moment as your own. Your hands were free, your senses entirely absorbed. Such a variant of the fluorescent charm was pure gold. Ryan could already envision dozens of ways to profit. As a devoted foodie, Ron might broadcast the taste and texture of his favorite dishes directly into the mouths of cold water skeptics. He could even share the tactile thrill of spellcasting itself, revolutionizing how young witches and wizards learned magic. No more fumbling through dusty tomes, students would feel each wand movement in their bones. Yet, despite its obvious promise, Ron hadn't dreamed up any of these possibilities. And that, to Ryan, was an opportunity waiting to be seized. Ryan possessed the skill to make any witch or wizard live out their deepest daydreams. But he chose not to, for the good of the wizarding world. Historically, full immersion daydream spells were reserved for master occlumens. Even then, the invention of such charms had already driven wizarding marriage rates to new lows. If ordinary witches and wizards could step into their own personal protagonist cinema, few would ever bother tying the knot. In the original timeline, Fred and George had once released a daydream enchantment keyed to special props. Yet their creation still depended on raw, imaginative talent. No matter how brilliant the vision, you always sensed its unreality when you awakened. Dream and waking life stayed safely distinct. Ron's latest innovation, combined with Ryan's blueprint for a private fantasy theater, changed all that. Their spell blurred the line so thoroughly that dreams felt as real as everyday experience. Moments ago, an exhilarated Ron had put the new charm to the test. Sweaty and breathless, he burst into the Gryffindor dormitory, eyes alight. Ryan slipped in just behind him, watching in silence. He suspected Ron would never pause to consider the wider consequences of this breakthrough. At last, Ryan broke the quiet. "So, did it work?" Ron grinned. "Perfectly." Harry, sprawled across his trunk and still reeling from potion side effects, sneered back. "Oh, and you did it all by yourself?" Harry's shout echoed through the clearing. "It's just me." Ron Weasley's jaw clenched. He'd nearly forgotten the real reason Harry had taken that strange potion in the first place. "Fluorescent flash," Ron barked, leveling his wand at Harry, only to pause when he realized why he was doing it. With an exasperated flick, he muttered, "Finite incantitum." Harry's furious retort died on his lips when a sudden rush of memories and sensations overwhelmed him. In his mind's eye, he was crouched behind a tree, damp earth pressing into his hand and knee. He could feel the cool stickiness of dew as he fumbled for his camera, snapping picture after picture of Fred and George rushing past, unaware of his presence. A moment later, Harry bolted upright, staring at his reflection in the silvered surface of his wand. "I'm back to normal," he breathed. The eerie confidence that had made him feel like the master of everything, Ron reduced to nothing more than his sidekick, had slipped away the instant Ron's countercharm hit him. Ron watched him, wand still raised, uncertainty flickering behind his ginger hair. "Is that "The same spell I cast?" he muttered. Hermione Granger stepped forward, relief softening her features. "I'm just glad you found a new use for your charm, Ron. Who knew a little illumination could break Harry free from that potion's effects?" Harry rubbed his temples, blinking as if waking from a long dream. "Thanks, both of you," he said hoarsely. He tucked his wand away and offered Ron a tentative grin. "I owe you one." Ron shrugged, lowering his wand. "Just don't go drinking any more random potions, Potter." Harry laughed, the sound light and genuine again. "Deal." As they headed back toward the castle, the late afternoon sun gilded the trees overhead. Normal, ordinary, and exactly as it should be. Chapter 397. Ron just wants to make money. It was 7:30 in the Ravenclaw boys' dormitory, and the dawn light filtered softly through the tall windows. Ron Weasley stood before the glass, utterly astonished. His reflection looked as ordinary as ever, red hair mussed from sleep, freckles dusting his cheeks, but somehow he'd just performed a spell unlike anything he'd ever seen. "So, I can use my emotions to turn memories into magical projectiles?" He stared at his pale reflection, still numb with disbelief. Bullets made of memory? Across the room, Ryan, his temporary tutor and a master of esoteric magic, offered a small, encouraging smile. He held out a slender book bound in deep blue leather, The Magic of Emotions. "Exactly," Ryan said. "Your strong feelings, your hopes, your regrets, your fondest memories can be distilled into pure magical force. You're naturally impulsive and passionate. That's both your greatest strength and your weakest vulnerability. After all, students usually need weeks of practice before they see a hint of success with this kind of art. You've done remarkably well." Ron flipped through the pages, enchanted by diagrams showing memory-shaped runes and incantations etched in silver ink. He pressed a thumb to the cover, as if to make it real. "Think of Andros," Ryan continued, leaning casually against a bunk. "He summons a giant Patronus without a wand, pure willpower. You, Ron, are built for emotional magic. There's nothing strange about you excelling." Ryan's eyes sparkled with something like hope. "I've dreamed of founding a school dedicated to this, helping wizards discover the unique magic that only they can wield. You, Ginny, Harry, so many more have talents waiting to be unlocked." Ron closed the book, heart pounding. He'd never looked at his emotions the same way again, and certainly never imagined they might one day pay off in more ways than one. Through the system panel's precise guidance, Ryan knew that with enough effort, he could master any skill to the level of its greatest practitioner. Never in his wildest dreams, though, did he expect that in less than 6 years since crossing over, he would become all but invincible. The only being capable of contesting him was a death god so vast and so unmoored from his own identity that few dared approach him. Having toured the wonders of Atlantis and the arcane academies of Moon City, Ryan realized there was no need to establish yet another school. Wizards everywhere already had their own institutions. Still, he couldn't shake his love of teaching. Now, it was time to help Ron Weasley awaken the true breadth of his magical talent. Ryan gathered Harry, Ron, and Hermione in the common room, his expression earnest. "Ron, what you've developed isn't just another charm. It's unique, akin to a Patronus, but infinitely more powerful. Think of it as your personal emblem of peace." Ron's face split into a proud grin. Hermione leaned in, curiosity shining in her eyes. Harry, however, frowned as he pieced together the deeper implication. "Wait," he said slowly. "Are you saying Ron's magic works on Andros the same way the Patronus charm works on Dementors, and that only Ron can produce that effect?" Ryan nodded. "Exactly. If anyone else could replicate it, they'd have forced an end to conflict across the globe by now." "Forced peace?" Ron echoed, blinking in genuine bewilderment. Harry nodded, placing a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. Ron's grin faded into thoughtful puzzlement. While everyone else exchanged looks of astonishment, he was already plotting. In that moment, Ron began sketching out schemes for how his one-of-a-kind power might revolutionize everything, from safeguarding magical communities to reshaping the very business of magical security. Hermione cleared her throat. "Ron, maybe let's focus first on mastering the spell and understanding its limits." But Ron's eyes glinted with a playful mischief. "Oh, I intend to," he said. "And when it's perfected, we'll see how many industries are about to be turned on their heads." He began by enlisting Gryffindor's own celebrities, Fred and George Weasley, to testify to his power. Once their endorsement was on record, Harry Potter and even Draco Malfoy stepped forward with their support. Finally, through his cordial relationship with Cedric Diggory, he secured the last major Hogwarts endorsement. By then, rumors of his unique ability had spread through every corridor and common room of the castle. Step 2 hardly required any effort on his part. As the son of the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and with Hogwarts standing alone as the United Kingdom's sole wizarding school, news of his remarkable gift would inevitably reach every witch and wizard across Britain. Step 3 was where the real opportunity lay: commercialization. He envisioned offering a taste of normal life to those languishing in St. Mungo's. A wizard who had lost his sense of taste could once again savor rich flavors. A legless patient could feel the exhilarating rush of running. A displaced auror or unemployed witch could relive the thrill of a high-stakes pursuit. All it would cost was a handful of gold galleons he could then use to fund his own ventures and personal enjoyment. To make it work, he needed a reliable way to store and transfer his magic. He would develop or commission a specialized receptacle capable of holding his unique power. Then he'd file for a patent and bind every transaction with an unbreachable magical contract, ensuring neither theft nor unauthorized duplication of his gift. With those safeguards in place, his talent could truly transform lives and secure his fortune across the entire British wizarding world. Ryan's words hit him like a thunderclap. His magic, his own, served a far greater purpose than he'd ever imagined. Not only could it be passed on to another, but no other wizard could replicate its effects. "Yes," Ryan said, "your magic carries what I call the power of understanding." He paused, watching Ron's skeptical expression. "Though it works in only one direction, through rigorous practice of what I term cognitive overlay, you can amplify your subject's yearning for peace. Then, by weaving in carefully selected positive memories from your daily life, you infuse your magic with these peaceful desires." Ryan smiled, strange and knowing. At full strength, anyone touched by your spell will begin to see peace as the ultimate ideal, and truly, joyously embrace life. Ron's jaw dropped. It sounded eerily like the six-path sage from Naruto, who spread the will for peace by sharing chakra. The crucial difference, however, was that Ron's spell didn't forge a mutual psychic bond. It was strictly one way. "This is exactly the Imperious Curse," Ron muttered under his breath. "I might as well cast Imperious on every warmonger who stands in the way of peace and still collect my fees." He shook his head. "Harry and the others have bigger things to worry about than my mood swings." Ryan shook his head. "Actually, Harry, your magic is a little different. You're not meant to overpower people. You're meant to bring out the best in them, to awaken those who are under a curse or a dark influence." Harry frowned, thinking back to Ryan's words, work hard on occlumency, on brain blocking. Could that really accelerate his magical growth? In their last session, Ryan had hinted, almost inadvertently, that mastering occlumency might be the key to powers as rare as those granted by the Resurrection Stone. Harry knew he had to level up, and fast. Ryan glanced at him and offered a small, encouraging smile. "You're ready for it, Harry." He leaned forward, voice serious. The word occlumency literally means sealing the mind. On the surface, it's a shield, one that keeps a legilimens from slipping into your thoughts. But there's more to it than mere defense. It's a discipline in gathering your mind, honing your concentration. And we both know magic flows from your will, your emotions, and the power behind them. If the training weren't so brutally demanding, some might even call it inhumane, it would probably be a required course at Hogwarts. He paused, the candlelight flickering across his face. Then he sighed. "So let's begin." In Ryan's view, occlumency was nothing more than a meditation technique, a way to defend one's mind. But there was a crucial point he hadn't mentioned. Just as occlumency forges an impenetrable shield, legilimency polishes the mind's spear. And the spear, he argued, was far more tempting. Invading another person's thoughts and reading them like an open book seemed infinitely more exhilarating than torturing yourself to keep intruders out, and it fed that irresistible curiosity to uncover other people's secrets. "How difficult is it?" Harry asked. "And why is it considered inhumane?" Ron chimed in, his eyes bright with interest. Ryan regarded them both coolly. If you refuse to rely on anyone else, solitude becomes the greatest ally of this magic. Harry frowned. What do you mean by that? You have to learn to be completely alone, Ryan said softly. Imagine the world consists only of you. Discard every emotion. Focus solely on your own thoughts. No memory, no feeling, just pure observation. Ron snorted. Isn't that just daydreaming? Wrong, Ryan replied, shaking his head. It's disciplined, habitual daydreaming, training your mind to wander on command and strike without warning. He paused, letting the words sink in. There's a lot more to learn if you're willing to go that far. Chapter 398, Occlumency. That's really difficult, Harry admitted, frowning. But is it inhumane? Ron piped up. Wait, Harry said, intrigued, tugging at his chin. Did you actually say we have to rely on someone else? You mean you didn't fall into Ron's usual traps? Ryan smiled. What I told you is precisely how I learned occlumency. Ordinary people, people like you two, and even the methods you find in textbooks, always depend on someone else. He paused, looking between them. You pick someone you trust completely. That person penetrates your mind, rummages through the memories you'd most hate to expose, and trains you to resist that intrusion. Harry's eyes widened. Isn't that cruel? Perhaps, Ryan conceded, but it works. One caveat, don't do it too often. You two are impulsive by nature. Limit your sessions to once a day at most. And, very important, every night before bed, clear your mind of every last emotion. Keep it blank and calm so you can restore your mental energies. Ron scowled. Mediocre people, huh? You're calling us mediocre? Ryan shrugged. Just stating facts. What did you do, Harry? Did I lead you astray? Impulsive? Ron jabbed at his friend, frustrated. Meanwhile, Harry, ever proud of his Ravenclaw coolness, found himself at a loss for words. He'd thought he understood occlumency before, but Ryan's method was proving to be far more extreme. As impulsive as you are, Harry, you've learned restraint, and that's exactly why you'll understand what I mean. Ryan shot back. And ordinary wizards, aren't they just like me? He didn't wait for Harry's reply, only registering a flash of surprise at his friend's words. Whether the Harry from the old timeline was impetuous hardly matters. This year's Ravenclaw Harry still wears his heart on his sleeve. Last year, he'd barged into the bathroom to save Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle from those trolls. He'd slipped down the hidden fourth-floor passage alone to confront Voldemort. And at Malfoy Manor, he'd joined Draco and the others to find where Voldemort stashed the locket. If it weren't for the pull of Voldemort's soul fragments, and without Ron and the rest, he might have wavered between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, like Hermione herself. Ron shook his head with a wry smile. This kind of magic just isn't for me. I'm planning to use my skills to earn a living, so mastering occlumency isn't exactly a priority. Harry frowned, thinking back to Ryan's explanation of legilimency. As long as you don't meet the caster's gaze or take a direct hit from their wand, your memories stay protected. Ryan, should I learn occlumency? Harry asked. He glanced at Ron, wondering if he was the right person to turn to. His schedule was already jam-packed. A-level classes, Quidditch practice, Ryan's extra tutoring, and those 3 months of life-altering potions. Adding occlumency lessons felt like biting off more than he could chew. Ryan leaned back in his chair. You and Ron can run through the basic blocking exercises at bedtime, practice the mental drills. But full training, wait until you're 17. Young wizards' emotions shift so quickly during adolescence, they can undermine your defenses rather than strengthen them. Harry nodded. He'd take the exercises under advisement, but defer the real work until he'd grown a little steadier, both mentally and magically. Ron, however, was already onto something else. He brightened and turned to their tutor. Master Ryan, is my emotion-infused magic limited to the Lumos spell? I've been tinkering with the idea of adding it to a fog charm. Imagine mist that carries a person's memories and feelings. You bottle it up, sell it, and the buyer just inhales the haze. Ryan raised an amused eyebrow. That's inventive, Ron, but before you start marketing sentimental mist, we should talk about the legal and ethical implications. On the third day back from the Christmas holidays, the courtyard of Hogwarts Castle crackled with excitement. Fred and George Weasley had improvised a stage, stacked chairs topped with a sturdy table, and now stood on it, each clutching a glass bottle filled with swirling mist. As long as you steer clear of offensive spells, No fire charms or weather jinxes. This brew even handles minor healing, Fred called out, his voice ringing across the courtyard. George raised his bottle high. Behold the upgraded version of the jinx that blasted us off our feet, courtesy of Ron a few days ago. Step right up and experience Ron Weasley's epic trek, the journey of our brother and one of the famed savior trio into the Forbidden Forest. And worry-free snacking, Fred added with a grin. One sip costs just a single silver, totally guiltless because you've earned it. A crowd of curious students pressed forward, eager for a closer look. Off to one side, Ron and Harry watched in amused silence. Neville Longbottom, eyes wide, gave Ron a pointed look. You didn't test it yourself? Ron scratched the back of his head. Neville groaned, half laughing. Your own magical breakthrough, and you won't even show your face out there? Fred Weasley stood on the makeshift stage in the Great Hall, sweeping his arms wide. Professional people do professional things, he announced, a wide grin on his face. George, equally enthusiastic, added, Just yesterday we proved we've got the best reputation in Hogwarts by selling these very gadgets to our classmates. Ron shifted from foot to foot at the edge of the platform, his cheeks tinged pink. If I joined you, I suppose I could hawk a few items, he said, trying to sound nonchalant. He forced his gaze downward, studying the polished floorboards so he wouldn't betray how nervous he really was. In truth, he'd been itching to stand beside his brothers, even if they only brought in a few nuts at first. But Fred and George had no concept of fair pricing, and Ron was all too aware that he'd end up subsidizing their profits. With a reluctant shrug, he slipped off the stage. Go on, then. Sell whatever you like. Splendid, Fred cried. Ron, save us some of that dragon's breath snack you've been chewing. Otherwise, how will we show off our fire glow flares? Ron rolled his eyes. I need to lose weight, he muttered, easing the waistline of his trousers. He'd already eaten half a dozen of George's experimental treats. If he wasn't careful, he'd need to replace all those broken belts in no time. Neville Longbottom approached next, clutching his empty coin pouch as if it were a nervy pet. I could really use a pair of your shrinking shorts, he stammered. My school robes are stretched to their limit. He tapped the pouch for emphasis, though it was painfully clear his last galleons had vanished in earlier purchases. I want one, too. Anthony Brayburst bounded forward, eyes shining. And a memory mirror. I've got to see how Harry snuck into the fourth-floor corridor. It'll be brilliant for Dumbledore's army practice. Before Harry could respond, Justin Finch-Fletchley popped up on his other side, curls bouncing. Well, these mirrors were inspected by Professor Flitwick, but what if they're a little too realistic? Couldn't someone get... He cast a wary glance at the maze of wires and lenses in Fred's latest prototype. Fred waved him off with a theatrical flourish. Nothing to worry about, Justin. We've ironed out the kinks. It's all perfectly safe, mostly. A ripple of eager chatter rose from the crowd, pressing in on the twins' stall. Students jostled for a better view of the fire glow flares lining the shelves and the gleaming dragon-scale smoke pellets nestled in wooden crates. Ron and Harry exchanged a helpless look, while Fred and George beamed at the chaos they'd created. All around them, coins clinked in pockets, curious hands reached out, and the buzz of excitement promised that Weasley's Wizard Wheezes had just become the hottest venture at Hogwarts. Justin's cheeks were still flushed from the corridor chill as he tried to steady himself. A Hufflepuff born to Muggle parents and once almost accepted by Eton, he wasn't used to feeling out of his depth. Come on, Michael chided, giving Justin a full shove. Ron hasn't even agreed to sell it to you yet. It's not that I don't trust you, Justin protested, voice wavering, but you know our potions have to be officially registered before they can go on the market, and Ron's... Harry cut him off with a sarcastic edge. You got Mr. Weasley to file a patent, right? Harry's impatience was obvious. After days of late-night potion brewing, he was unusually short with anyone outside his close circle. Justin's shoulders tensed, and Dudley slipped in behind him, placing a hand on each of Justin's arms. It's okay, Justin, Dudley said quietly, shooting Harry a pointed look. Ernie Macmillan hurried forward, eager to smooth things over. Professor Flitwick told me this workaround is even more useful than the usual registration process. Justin pressed his lips together, frustration bubbling over. All right, he muttered. I need to get to Charms. He turned on his heel and marched back into the castle, leaving the others standing in the drafty hallway. As the clock chimed, they each realized their next class was about to begin, and the Hufflepuffs slipped away for the remainder of their Charms lesson. I finally get why you wanted me to register, Harry, Ron said at last. Harry nodded. Once you're officially on the list, nobody can pretend to be you. Ron huffed. Still, there were half a dozen Justin Fletchley lookalikes wandering around. Fine, let's go sign up too. But we don't even have any classes left today, Harry protested as they headed across the courtyard. Doesn't matter, Ron muttered. Fred and George said we have to. Harry paused and squinted at a group of girls standing by the notice board. Hey, Ron, aren't those the witches Fred and George set you up on a blind date with? They look kind of familiar. Ron turned to look. Blimey, you're right. Although Harry had never actually met them, something about their easy smiles and bright eyes struck him as genuinely friendly. Chapter 175, Snape in Distress. Severus Snape stared out the tall windows of his office, hands clasped behind his back, and felt as though the entire wizarding world had turned on its head. Only weeks ago, Lord Voldemort's ambassadors had shown up at Hogwarts gates, insisting they wished to negotiate peace. Before anyone could make sense of that offer, the original Dark Lord, long imprisoned, had been inexplicably freed from Azkaban. And then, in the most bewildering turn of all, he'd been killed. Again. His jaw tightened at the memory. Dumbledore's old rival, Gellert Grindelwald, had slipped in under cover of night and extinguished Voldemort's life as easily as one might snuff out a candle. When had these titanic figures grown so vulnerable? Had the world's most feared Dark Lord become as fragile as a common boggart? More troubling still was the discovery Snape had made only days ago. The shadowy figures trailing him, those mysterious operatives sent to capture or silence him, were none other than his own former students. Young witches and wizards he had taught at Hogwarts, now carrying out orders for the very man Snape had vowed to serve. It struck him like a curse. What had he done so wrong to earn their betrayal? Snape's mind raced back to the old Slytherin creed, align yourself with power, no matter where it lies. He had chosen carefully, first Voldemort, then Dumbledore, each shift made out of self-preservation and a desire to influence events from within. But now, with Voldemort gone and Grindelwald ruling the shadows, he was on the right side by default. Should he have clung to the dying embers of his former master's cause? If so, why had his students abandoned it so completely for the twisted purity of bloodlines? Pure blood supremacy, he thought wryly, was nothing but a tapestry of lies stitched together with arrogance. His protégés had drunk deeply of that poison. They believed their heritage made them nobler, stronger. They deceived themselves and each other. But none of it mattered now. Snape drew in a steadying breath. The world was shifting under his feet, allies and enemies alike exchanging masks with bewildering speed. He would survive. He had to. For the sake of Hogwarts, of Dumbledore's vision, and, if the fates allowed, for the fragile hope that one day peace might truly reign once more. And if his former students chose to hunt him for it, let them come. He was ready. He hated to admit it, but he truly cared about Harry Potter. Lately, Harry had been pulling away from him, hovering on the brink of closeness, yet never daring to meet his eyes. It was so strange that at first he'd wondered if Voldemort had cursed him, somehow warping his face so that Harry recoiled in fear. He'd even been furtively studying his reflection in mirrors, convinced at one point that Sirius had been poisoning Harry's mind with lies. But after a few skirmishes with Sirius, both verbal and physical, he'd ruled that out. Next, he imagined that Harry might have dreamed up some elaborate scenario, that he was secretly working for Voldemort, or that he'd fallen out with the Dark Lord and was now on the run. Surely a better test would expose the truth, and Hagrid had been only too happy to oblige, yet the results proved his hunch wrong once again. So why the sudden chill? Why did Harry keep his distance? The not knowing was maddening. Each evening after dinner, he found himself pacing the corridor outside the potion storeroom, restless as a caged animal. Inevitably, he overheard the snatches of gossip drifting out from passing Slytherins and Hufflepuffs, but he forced himself not to care. All that mattered was discovering why Harry had turned his back on him, and how to win him back. Severus Snape's footsteps echoed through the corridor as he made his way toward the dungeons, until raised voices stopped him in his tracks. "Damn Weasley! There's definitely something wrong with his contraption," one student snarled. "Professor Flitwick insisted it's perfectly safe," another countered. "It's still registered with the Ministry of Magie. See, Flitwick, head of Ravenclaw and Ministry liaison, no less. Sure, but everyone knows Ron's father runs the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Do you honestly believe they'd let Ron mess around with experimental magic?" At the unexpected pairing of Ron Weasley and invention, Snape's interest was piqued. Could this gossip explain Harry's recent odd behavior? Gathering his composure, he stepped out of the shadows. "Professor Snape!" Two Hufflepuffs, Ernie Macmillan and Justin Finch-Fletchley, froze mid-whisper. Snape's voice was cool and precise. "What invention are you referring to?" Ernie and Justin exchanged nervous glances. Silence settled over the corridor as Snape's dark eyes searched theirs, demanding answers. They stood before Professor Snape, nervously clutching a small glass vial. "It's a mist, bottled memory mist," one of them said, voice hurried. "Exactly." The other pipetted the last drop and pressed the vial into Snape's waiting hand. "Ron invented it. You inhale this, and you see through Ron's eyes. His memories become yours." Snape's dark eyes flicked between the two students. "Justin," he said flatly, "you had doubts about this. Did you voice them to Weasley himself?" Justin swallowed. "Sir, Harry didn't react well when I mentioned it. He was unusually impatient. He even mocked me." "I see," Snape murmured. He raised an eyebrow as Justin began to speak again, but cut him off before another word could be uttered. "That will be all. You may go." "Thank you, Professor." In an instant, the two boys vanished down the corridor, leaving Snape alone in the dimly lit classroom. He stared at the empty doorway, his expression unreadable. Ron Weasley, that red-headed fool, an inventor, memory potions no less, and Harry, secluding himself, snapping at anyone who crossed him. Something was amiss. A secret lay beneath it all, one that had driven a wedge between student and professor. Later that evening, at 10 o'clock, Snape stood before Dumbledore's desk on the 8th floor. The headmaster peered at him over half-moon spectacles, concern creasing his forehead. "Severus," Dumbledore said gently, "you believe there's trouble with Weasley's new potion?" "Undoubtedly," Snape replied, his voice low and certain, "and I intend to find out exactly what it's doing to Harry Potter." Severus Snape stepped into Dumbledore's office, his black robes swishing behind him. His dark eyes were fixed, unblinking. "I know Ron Weasley's magic better than anyone," he began flatly. "Harry's made that perfectly clear." Dumbledore looked up from his desk. Archival quill paused in midair. "Then you must admit there's something unusual about what happened," he said. "This needs a proper investigation." Snape's lips curled in annoyance, as if he were a child arguing with his parents. "Albus, you and I both know why I'm here, just as you knew why you clashed with Sirius the other night." "I had Phileas Flitwick analyze the enchantment," Dumbledore continued, waving a hand, "and I myself experimented with it out of curiosity. And," Snape prompted, folding his arms. Dumbledore leaned back, as though dismissing something trivial. "Frankly, it's a fog spell, nothing more. Any extraordinary effect is due entirely to Ron. He simply uncovered a natural aptitude." Snape raised a single brow. "So it's simply raw talent?" "Exactly." Dumbledore rubbed his temples. "Much like Tom Riddle excelling at the killing curse." He paused, wincing at his own analogy. An unfortunate comparison, perhaps. Before Snape could retort, Dumbledore's eyes sparkled with mischief. "But suppose," he murmured, "it isn't just Ron's talent at work. What if it's Voldemort's influence channeled through Harry? After all, Ron does share a bed with him in the dormitory." A low chuckle escaped the headmaster. "A deliciously unsettling thought, Severus. What do you make of it?" Snape's face drained of color as the suggestion took hold. A memory flickered through his mind, one he had long tried to bury. He opened his mouth to speak, his voice suddenly urgent. Albus Dumbledore and Severus Snape stood in the soft glow of the headmaster's office, the fire crackling behind them. Dumbledore ran a hand through his silver hair, his expression tense. "This makes no sense," he admitted. "Harry's raw ability may still be unpolished, but ever since he arrived at Hogwarts this year, his magic has blossomed like a new dawn. Voldemort, by contrast, can only seize the occasional opportunity, and that tenuous link with Harry, to act. If he tried to strike out on his own, his fractured soul would simply collapse. He paused, leaning closer. Those strange phenomena we've witnessed, they can't be Voldemort's doing. They're coming from Harry. Since the Christmas holidays, his once bright fledgling power hasn't dimmed. It has only grown stronger. I believe Ron has been touched by Harry's magic and, in turn, discovered untapped strengths of his own. Dumbledore's eyes softened for a moment, relief flickering amid his worry. But that could be dangerous for Ron. Snape's voice broke the silence, low and urgent. What about Harry? He reached out as though to grasp the very air. Harry carries the Horcrux, Lily's ancient protection, and the purified secret of an Obscurus. He is, quite literally, a miracle. He drew a sharp breath. My original plan was simply to let him remain an ordinary student at Hogwarts, never unleashing that potential. Snape shook his head, regret etched into his features. I was so very wrong. Dumbledore's face was grave as he studied the magical readings before him. The crimson spark of that miracle, the sudden reappearance of the Phoenix, and the transformations we've watched, everything points to one terrifying truth. He has surpassed every law of magic we know. He paused, exhaling slowly. Severus Snape looked up, his eyes narrowing. What does that mean? A living Obscurus, Dumbledore replied in a hushed tone. At the sound of the word, Snape's composed restraint shattered. He unleashed a sharp, resonant roar that echoed through the chamber, a raw declaration of alarm and disbelief. Chapter 176, Eye of Narcissus. Severus Snape's dark eyes burned with fury. His jutting jaw twitched as he leveled his birchwood wand directly at Albus Dumbledore's heart. Every muscle in his face knotted like coiled steel. Tell me, he hissed, voice cracking with barely suppressed rage. What else have you done to Harry? Dumbledore stood calmly, his expression gentle but grave. He raised a hand in placation, as though he could disarm Snape simply by will. I understand your anger, Severus, he said quietly, but I swear to you, nothing was done deliberately. Petunia's treatment of Harry, it was an accident. I never imagined she would go so far. Snape's lip curled. An accident? They see magic as a poison, something to be purged from Harry. You know as well as I do that children marked by an Obscurus rarely live past 10. Dumbledore's eyes glimmered with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. I discovered Harry's Obscurus far too late. By then, it had already taken root within him. He paused, drawing strength from a memory that seemed to glow behind his eyes. But you must understand this, Severus. Lily's protection changed everything. That same love which shielded Harry at the cost of her own life transformed his Obscurus, turning it from a curse into his greatest asset. The old headmaster held Snape's gaze, unwavering. Harry will live. He will thrive. I promise you, it will be all right. For a long moment, the tension throbbed between them, the pointed wand, the unspoken fears. Then Severus's grip on his wand loosened, his shoulders sagging as stunned disbelief melted into reluctant trust. Dumbledore nodded once, firmly. Come now. There is much we still have to prepare. And with that, the duel of words ended, leaving only the dawning promise that even the darkest power could be guided by the light of a mother's love. A tense hush settled over the room before a voice broke the silence. It's fine, someone said. Don't ever say fine when you're talking about Harry, another shot back. I thought the boy would be perfectly safe under your plan, came a third voice, but somehow he's come through unscathed. Amazing, isn't it? A fourth agreed, though his tone was anything but complimentary. But it was all accidents, a fifth scoffed. What would have happened to him without Lily's protection? He'd be a dead child by now, doomed to never see 10, even after besting Voldemort. A pause, then a cold question. So what now? How many more crocodile tears do you plan to shed? Severus Snape forced himself to remain outwardly calm, though his knuckles turned chalk white around the stem of his teacup. He drew in a steadying breath and let it out in a measured sigh. When I first witnessed Potter's magic, he said quietly, I was struck by its brilliance, like watching a magnificent phoenix take flight. I never stopped to consider that such beauty could conceal an ugly Obscurus. Harry is the one the prophecy speaks of, Dumbledore said quietly, the boy who wields a power Voldemort cannot fathom, and who can ultimately defeat him. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The prophecy places Harry on a footing equal to Voldemort's. He has the potential to become an extraordinary wizard, perhaps the most powerful of our age. Someone spoke up, voice trembling. Then why must we, give Harry to Petunia? He's not even her son by blood. Dumbledore met the question with steady eyes. Because Harry unknowingly carries a fragment of Voldemort's soul. Only Lily's sacrificial protection, her love, though not born of blood, can shield him from that darkness as long as he remains under Petunia's roof. Remove him from that protection, and the Horcrux within him will be overwhelmed by Voldemort's evil. And the alternative? Another voice pressed. Dumbledore drew a slow breath. He will either master parts of Voldemort's power or be consumed by Voldemort's mind. A hush fell over the room. The decision was harsh, almost cruel, but Dumbledore's tone brooked no argument. The prophecy had not only uffed Harry into being, it had sketched his perilous path. A gentler wizard might have balked, feared the notion of raising another Dark Lord in a child's body. But the world was changing too rapidly to cling to sentiment alone. Ever since British witches and wizards learned that wizards had walked on the moon, the old insistence on avoiding any sacrifice for the sake of idealized safety had seemed quaint. Progress demanded hard choices, and for Harry's sake, there was no other way. Severus Snape muttered under his breath, "Why has Harry suddenly shut me out? Does he share your, shall we say, less than exceptional gift of second sight? Can he see the dark mark branded on my arm, or sense the aura of my persistent dabbling in forbidden arts?" Albus Dumbledore gave a bemused sigh. "Or perhaps, Severus," he suggested gently, "you might start by washing your hair." A cold, authoritative voice cut through the corridor from the headmaster's office. "Tear apart!" It was exactly 11:10 a.m. at the Quidditch Stadium. Snape sat alone in the back row of the stands, hidden beneath his cloak. In 10 minutes, Ravenclaw would square off against Hufflepuff. He had expected the stands to be half empty, just as they had been at the last match, when everyone was enthralled by the novelty of those magically enhanced Muggle contraptions. Yet today, the stadium buzzed with energy. Professors lined the railings, first years pressed their faces against the barriers, and older students waved banners and cheered. Overhearing the excited chatter, Snape finally understood why. What had once seemed wondrous, a teapot that whistled tunes, an enchanted top hat that tipped itself at a bow, had lost its shine after the Christmas break. Street vendors and village shops, eager to outdo one another, had unveiled ever more elaborate kitchen gadgets, umbrellas, and pocket watches. Now, bored by yet another self-stirring cauldron or color-changing cloak, the students longed once more for the thrill of Quidditch. Leaning back on the cold stone bench, Snape allowed himself a small, wry smile. At least today, the true sport of wizards reigned supreme. Severus Snape settled into the chilly stone stands of Hogwarts Stadium, watching the chaos of the Quidditch Cup with thinly veiled impatience. Around him, the crowd roared for the three rivals most likely to claim victory: Harry Potter, Hogwarts superstar seeker, Dudley Dursley, the unlikely broom flyer turned expert keeper, and Cedric Diggory, the handsome young captain of Hufflepuff, whose fame nearly matched Harry's. None of it held Snape's real interest. He was here only to bide his time until he could slip away and cast a singular, forbidden spell. At the break between halves, he would make his way down to an unused classroom in the dungeons and summon the Eye of Narcissus, a family secret of the princes, whispered of in only the most arcane circles. Its origin lay in the tragic Greek myth of Narcissus, the son of the river god Cephissus and the nymph Liriope. So entranced was Narcissus by his own reflection that he pined himself to death and was transformed into the daffodil that still bends over water, endlessly gazing at its image. Like its namesake, the spell restricted its user to one vision, oneself. But it did so through a technique far removed from legilimency. Instead of probing memories directly, the Eye of Narcissus set up a metaphysical magnetism. The caster becomes the negative pole. The self-image lodged within another's recollections becomes the positive pole. Drawn inexorably together, the caster sees only the self, the version remembered by someone else. Snape inhaled deeply, steeling himself for what he would inevitably discover, and what he might lose in the process. Tonight, he intended to peer into another person's mind and behold his own reflection. And nothing, not even a high-stakes Quidditch match, would stand in his way. Despite its formidable power, the spell carried a fatal flaw. Its preparatory incantation dragged on interminably and could not be halted once begun. Worse, till the target had to harbor genuine affection for the caster. Only then would the magic bind. For a moment, Snape wondered if Lily had ever glimpsed James's raw devotion, rough words and all, through such an enchantment, but he dismissed the thought with a shake of his head. The true obstacle was simpler. The subject must be utterly absorbed in something else. The instant they suspected they were being observed, or their concentration wavered, the connection snapped cleanly. That limitation explained why Snape had never attempted the spell in potions. It was his own class. He couldn't risk staring at Harry for the minutes required without inviting questions. Instead, he waited for a moment when Harry would be off guard. Harry had spent the day sequestered in the Ravenclaw dormitory, so Snape judged the Quidditch stands, usually empty at this hour, the ideal vantage point. Cloaked in an old robe, he settled into the shadows to weave his enchantment unseen. But the calm didn't last. People drifted in far sooner than Snape had anticipated, filling the seats and choking off his line of sight. With no safe way to continue from a distance, he made a split-second decision. He shattered the small containment jar he used to channel the spell and strode directly toward Harry. Now, nearly 10 minutes into the ritual, Harry Potter's thoughts lay exposed before him. Snape held his breath, waiting for that final moment when the barrier between observer and observed would finally dissolve, and he would learn everything. Professor Severus Snape lingered in a shadowed alcove that no one else noticed, his black robes whispering against the cold stone. He muttered an incantation so softly it might have been the echo of his own breath. Suddenly, a flicker of blue light sparked in his eyes, and then he bowed his head, as if pulled into some unseen current. Images flooded his mind. He saw Hogwarts as he had never known it, long deserted, its corridors draped in cobwebs, bats skittering through silent halls. Outside the tall windows, a swollen blood moon cast an eerie crimson glow over rolling leaden clouds, while thunder roared like a beast in the heavens. He felt a jolt, a sudden shift in perception. He was no longer walking those halls as Snape, but somehow viewing them through another's eyes. Driven forward, he climbed the narrow spiral staircase of the astronomy tower. At the very top, where open air should have welcomed the stars, stood an enormous stone sarcophagus. The blood moon's light glinted off its lid, and from within came 2 pairs of gleaming red eyes. Snape's hand went to his wand, and he eased closer, breath catching in his throat. As the lid slid open, the figure inside came into focus, and it was himself, pale as moonlight, with elongated canines that dripped shadow. He lay there, still as marble, yet exuding a dark vitality. Cradled in his arms was the one person he could never forget, Lily Evans. Her features were tranquil in death, her red hair spread like a halo across the stone. For a heartbeat, Snape froze. The impossible tableau, a vampiric doppelganger and the woman he had loved, etched itself into his mind. Then the wind swept over the tower in a furious gust, and Snape knew he stood at the threshold of a terrible new truth, one that would test every ounce of his loyalty and reshape the fate of them all. Chapter 401, Master of Time Management. Severus Snape's head was spinning. He barely registered the 2 shadowy figures before him when suddenly every scrap of information about them flooded into his mind. The vampire Count Severus Snape, and beside him, the vampire bride Lily Snape. Shock and, strangely, joy jolted through him at the realization. He strained to focus, but darkness swept over his vision. A sharp sting at his neck flared, and a faint, briny tang, like fish, raised alarms on his tongue. Then reality snapped back with a shout from the pitch. Harry Potter caught the golden snitch. Only 11 minutes. Ravenclaw wins. Lee Jordan's voice rang out, pulling Snape from his reverie. He opened his eyes to see Harry grinning, the snitch glinting triumphantly in his outstretched hand. A roar of applause rolled across the stadium. Sunlight caught on Harry's robes, making him shine like some irritating herald of victory. Yet, instead of frustration, a small, unexpected smile curved Snape's lips. All that turmoil, those dark visions, had sprung from a single dream of Harry. And if Harry could occupy him so completely, then perhaps it meant one thing above all. In the boy's eyes, Severus Snape was worth far more than James Potter ever had been. It would be wonderful if that dream were real, even if he really is nothing more than a lowly vampire. Behind Snape, Ryan stood between Luna and Hermione, their hands tugging him along, yet he wore a secretive smile. Snape wouldn't suspect for a moment that this wasn't all just a dream. "What's so funny?" Snape demanded, narrowing his eyes. Hermione gently squeezed Ryan's left hand. "A joy bug's crawled into his ear," she announced. "They feed on negative emotions and force you to grin for no reason." Luna pressed her small cheek against Ryan's right shoulder and spoke with total conviction about these fantastic creatures. "They aren't in any of the books," she chided Hermione. "You invented them just to get Ryan's attention." Hermione shot Luna a pointed look. "And what about that horn? You told us it came from a scimitar-horned Snorlax, but it was actually from the evil-horned Snorlax. If that horn hadn't been absolutely fresh, our house could have been destroyed." Her voice carried equal parts sarcasm and genuine concern. Hermione might loathe Luna's flights of fancy, but she'd never wish actual harm on her. "Please," she added softly, "learn to distinguish between fantasy and reality." Luna folded her arms, brimming with barely contained excitement. "I'm telling you, the scimitar-horned Snorlax is real." Hermione gave her a skeptical look. "The Snorlax what? It's true. Ryan told me so." Luna's cheeks flushed as she puffed out her little chest, staring defiantly at Hermione. "Ryan?" Hermione raised an eyebrow. She glanced at him, waiting for confirmation. "It exists," Ryan said gravely, nodding once. "In fact, shortly after I met Luna, I flew to Sweden just to plant the idea in her mind." Hermione scoffed. "Honestly." Moments later, they were gathered in the ship's main control room, immersed in the VR mind game that Ryan had designed. Penelope stood before the holographic display, lightsaber in hand, while the others watched the action unfold. On the screen, a towering wizard, muscular, white-bearded, and resolute, wielded a glowing staff in one hand and a gleaming sword in the other. He unleashed blasts of pure holy light, forcing the vampire Kate to huddle low, unable to shift into her bat form and escape. "Quick question," Penelope said, eyes fixed on the battle. "How do we assign attribute points to wizards in this simulation?" "1 point goes to the flash spell," Ryan answered without hesitation. "All the rest go into strength." Hermione leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "This is what you call the romance of wizards?" "In a manner of speaking," Ryan admitted with a small smile. Then, as if recalling a long-kept secret, he added, "And by the way, he's not Dumbledore. His name is Gandalf." He delivered the clarification with such deadpan seriousness that everyone stared at him in surprise, except Luna, who simply nodded, as if it all made perfect sense. "Here's a polished, idiomatic rewrite of the scene. This wizard NPC is nothing but nostalgia for our old world," Kate muttered as the robed figure drifted past. "Fine, let's just call him Gandalf," Ryan sighed. Kate rolled her eyes. "I can't take someone seriously if he looks like Dumbledore." Penelope reached out and tapped Ryan on the shoulder. "Actually, I want to switch classes. Let's go with an archer this time." "Okay," Ryan said, opening the character menu. "Here, this is Arash's template. Try it on Stella. You'll see why it's so popular." He waved and Stella's simple Jedi-style robe melted away. In its place, her body reformed, lean yet powerfully muscled, strangely modest only in key spots thanks to patches of some unknown animal pelt. Stella flexed her new limbs and glared. "What are you staring at? This is pretty weird," Kate admitted. "Wondering who Arash is?" Penelope asked, cheeks warming at Ryan's intent gaze. "He was King Menusher's trusted lieutenant, the greatest archer in ancient Persia, and he commanded the king's elite bow corps." Ryan leaned closer. "What makes him legendary?" Penelope's eyes lit up. "They say he once drew his bow atop Mount Damavand and loosed an arrow that blazed like a meteor all the way to the far bank of the Oxus River. All essential characters and details are preserved, with improved flow, grammar, and style for an English-speaking audience. That arrow ended the 60-year war between Turan and Persia, and to this day its flight marks the border that still stands. Even now, locals celebrate Tiragan, the summer solstice on which Arash climbed Mount Damavand to loose his fateful shot, as one of the grandest festivals of the year." Ryan stood before them in the virtual amphitheater, face impassive, voice solemn. "Arash's glory lies not only in that arrow, which flew farther than any before or since, but in the price he paid. His body was torn apart by the force of his own release. He died at the moment he guaranteed peace." Penelope, fully immersed in the simulation, hefted the gargantuan bow, nearly as tall as she was, and nocked an arrow of obsidian black. Her eyes glittered with excitement. "Steady, Stella," she murmured to herself, using the code name she and Kate had agreed upon. But suddenly Kate's voice echoed, more panicked than adventurous. "Why? Why am I dead?" The link to the spaceship's VR uplink had faltered, and she found herself alone in a blinding white void, the blazing sun overhead mocking her confusion. "Ryan!" Kate called out, her voice trembling. From the glowing sun above, Ryan's calm reply drifted back. Arash's sacrifice is remembered because he knew no other way to end that long, bitter war. He gave his life so that his people and Persia might have peace. Kate's hand went to her head, struggling to reconnect. Around her, the pure white world offered no answers, only the echo of Ryan's measured words. Back in the real world, just beyond the projection dome, Fred and George Weasley were hard at work. The twins pitched their latest novelty, glass smoke bottles containing recordings of Harry's most daring training sessions. George held up a puffing flask. "Step right up. Experience the real Harry Potter in action. Only 3 silver sickles a bottle." "Give me a bottle." Marcus Flint, Slytherin captain, and Oliver Wood, Gryffindor captain, shouted in unison. They lunged forward and each snatched a bottle from the twins' tray, grinning as Fred and George exchanged a satisfied conspiratorial look. Inside the dome, Penelope drew back the bowstring, preparing to release her arrow. Somewhere in the white void, Kate's voice still trembled, and overhead, the memory of Arash's sacrifice, etched forever into legend, hung in the dazzling light. "Since when did Gryffindor start copying our Slytherin tactics?" Draco's voice cut through the chatter by the stands. On the pitch, Marcus Flint and Adrian Pusey exchanged a quick grin, slipped a smoke bomb into their robes, paid the vendor, and slipped back into the crowd. "Did you see that, Ron?" Flint called over his shoulder. "And you, Ginny." Draco curled his lip. "You're both Slytherins. Marcus, you're our seeker. How can you act like you don't care if Harry's training methods get out?" Ron Weasley only smiled, completely unbothered. Ginny, for her part, was staring intently at Harry, clearly more interested in the game than Draco's taunts. Draco glanced over at the Ravenclaw players nearby. They'd seen the twins buying smoke bombs too, yet none of them looked surprised or worried. Either Harry's secret training plan was pure hype, or it was something only Potter could pull off. "What are you on about?" Harry's voice rang out as he strode up with his Nimbus 2000 under one arm. He swept Ginny into a quick hug, and she buried her face in his shoulder. "Malfoy here is just jealous," Ron said, patting Harry on the back. "He's wondering why we're not upset if someone leaks your drills." Harry and the other players exchanged amused glances, and then, all at once, they burst out laughing. Chapter 402, Flint's Bitterness. Draco stared at Roger Davis in utter disbelief. He must have misheard. Roger, ever cautious since last year's humiliating defeat, was grinning with confidence as he announced, "We've already clinched the Quidditch Cup this season, and our trump card isn't a new training routine." Draco's brow furrowed. "Then what is it?" Roger's grin broadened. "It's Harry Potter." "He's the best seeker at Hogwarts, maybe in the entire world," Phoenix Weasley added, eyes alight with excitement. "No one can touch him," said Chuzang. Bradley, Richard, and Henry all nodded in agreement. "He's simply unbeatable." Ron Weasley laughed and clapped Draco on the shoulder. "Just wait till you see him fly." Moments later, standing on the sidelines of the training pitch, Draco finally understood. Harry soared into the air on his gleaming Nimbus 2001 as 6 bludgers came hurtling at him from every direction. In a heartbeat, Harry twisted, ducked, and weaved, every dodge perfectly timed. His reflexes were nothing short of miraculous. Once Draco saw Harry's speed and agility in action, there was no denying it. With the rules as they stood, no team could hope to beat Hogwarts, unless they found a way to stop Harry Potter. Captain Flint had figured it out too, just like Gryffindor's own Oliver Wood. Oddly enough, both captains chose that very moment to announce the Triwizard Tournament, each declaring that this season would be their last shot at the Quidditch Cup. Wood's motivation was obvious, rally his team's morale. But why Flint would do the same puzzled Draco, until Flint let slip his true agenda. "Draco," Flint began, leaning forward in the dingy room they'd been ushered into. "You're friends with Potter, aren't you? I want you to talk to him. If he goes easy on us in our next match, I'll award you and your teammates a total of 100 gold galleons. Split it however you like. You know this is my final chance at the cup, so help me make it count." In that moment, everything clicked for Draco. Flint had deliberately summoned him here, dangling gold coins and leveraging Draco's connection to Harry as bait. It was a pity play, pure and simple, and a bribe he hoped would secure Puddlemere's victory. "Do you know Josephina Flint?" Flint's pale eyes searched Draco's face. Draco shook his head. "The name sounds familiar. Wasn't she Minister of Magic?" "She was," Flint confirmed, "and she's my ancestor." A flicker of surprise crossed Draco's features. Flint pressed on, her voice low and earnest. "I'm not from a family like the Woods. I have the freedom to pursue my dreams after graduation, but most of my teammates won't. They'll be bound by family duty the moment they leave Hogwarts." She paused. "Me, I'm destined for the Department of Magical Transportation. I'll be heading the portkey office." Draco's eyebrows rose. "That's precisely why we've thrown ourselves into winning every match," Flint said, turning away. "This is our one shot at Quidditch. Once school's over, it's back to obligation. I envy those who can chase their passions, because for me, the end is already written." Draco frowned. Flint met his gaze again. "Even if Harry Potter agreed to join our side, we'd still be underdogs. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff are formidable opponents. Hufflepuff only lost so badly before because Harry was the Seeker. If he'd been a chaser, they wouldn't have lost to Ravenclaw. We need Ravenclaw to let us win. Then we can do the rest ourselves." She clenched her fists, determination hardening her features. "What we need is hope, and looking across the pitch at Harry Potter, there's none to be found." An hour later, a ripple of shocked voices echoed across the Quidditch pitch. "Wait, did Flint really make this offer? Why on earth would we accept his gold?" Draco Malfoy's voice rose above the commotion. "Harry, what do you think? Should we take his money?" Most of the team exchanged angry, bewildered looks, but Harry Potter remained unruffled. He folded his arms and shook his head. "No, we can't do IST." Ron Weasley bit his lip, glancing between Harry and Draco. "But if Flint is serious this time, even with this stunt, we could still win the cup with Harry as Seeker." "Quidditch has nothing to do with dirty money," Roger Davies snapped, slamming his broom against the ground. He looked ready to fly off in a rage. Draco gave a firm nod. "All right, then. Let's refuse Flint outright." Harry stepped forward and patted Draco on the shoulder. "That's what I expected you'd say." Draco glanced around at their teammates, then back at Harry. "Still, I don't trust him. He won't stop at just one trick." Harry's gaze grew serious. "We need to stay on guard." Draco's eyes darkened with agreement. "Exactly. He'll be planning something else." High above them on the astronomy tower, a tall boy with dark hair watched the entire scene unfold. From his vantage point, he could see every tense exchange and catch every whisper. His expression was unreadable, as if he already knew what would come next. A tall, thin man with a snowy white beard stepped out from behind the dark-haired boy. "What's the matter, Tom? The Slytherins these days, truly absurd." Tom Riddle's brow furrowed. "Potter refused. He actually refused." The old wizard clicked his tongue. "He's been different lately." Riddle gave a slow nod. "Not just his magic, his agility, his reaction time, they're improving at an astonishing rate." "Do the Potters carry the blood of a magical creature?" the man wondered aloud. "Something like Dumbledore's phoenix, perhaps?" Riddle's eyes narrowed. Until now, he had taken Dumbledore's prophecy with a grain of salt. In the past, he would have assumed Harry merely had enough talent and sheer luck to survive a showdown with Voldemort. But after witnessing Potter's recent feats, Riddle was no longer so sure. Last year, Harry had confronted a weakened Voldemort and emerged victorious. But that was when the Dark Lord's power was fragmented and fragile. Riddle understood better than most how formidable Voldemort was at the height of his strength. Defeating him might be possible. Killing him outright was another matter. With Horcruxes anchoring his immortality, Voldemort seemed virtually invincible. If Riddle himself were not bound by a Horcrux, he confessed inwardly, he would have long since abandoned any hope of destroying the Dark Lord forever. "No." "I've already discussed it with Severus," Dumbledore replied, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "He came to me because he noticed Harry's been keeping his distance lately." Riddle raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what might be the cause?" "A dream," Dumbledore said, leaning in as if sharing a secret. Riddle's interest sharpened. A dream? Indeed. After looking into Harry's sudden chill toward him, Severus discovered it all traced back to one single dream. Riddle sat forward eagerly. Let me guess. Harry dreamed Snape was bowing to me, declaring himself my undercover agent? A faint, pleased smile played at the corner of Riddle's lips, but Dumbledore's laughter cut it short. Not quite. You're wrong, Riddle frowned. Then what did he dream? Dumbledore's grin widened. Harry dreamed that Severus was his father. Riddle blinked, taken aback. His father? Dumbledore gave a theatrical sigh. Don't worry, Lily's still his mother, but ever since that dream, Severus can't stop smiling. He shook his head. Some ill-informed wizards have even begun whispering that Severus has taken a new lover. Ridiculous, of course. As we both know, Snape once betrayed me for another woman. Riddle fell silent, turning his gaze toward Harry with a glint of curiosity and something darker flickering in his eyes. Chapter 179, Hermione's Regret. Ryan paused on the narrow bridge that arched between the astronomy tower and the west wing, drinking in the late afternoon glow over the Hogwarts grounds. From his vantage point, the castle looked almost peaceful, an illusion he knew couldn't last. Above him, in a slender turret alcove, two pale figures leaned forward, studying him with equal intensity. One claimed to prefer the heights, the other the bridge itself, but Ryan knew better. Everyone here was watching everyone else. Dumbledore's soft chuckle drifted down from the balcony. Snape's tales are never quite what they seem, the headmaster observed. Ryan smiled. He'd begun to suspect the same. Earlier, at Snape's insistence, Dumbledore had listened to a half-truth about Harry's dream, how the boy had pictured Professor Snape and Lily Potter as an unlikely couple. What Snape never mentioned was that in the dream, both he and Lily were vampires. Nor did he confess that he had once killed Harry, if only for an instant. Instead, the potions master had blushed like a schoolgirl, casting an awkward smile over the shock he knew would follow. Everything unfolding at Hogwarts of late struck Ryan as almost theatrical. Oliver Wood's impassioned last stand at the Quidditch pitch, Marcus Flint's public unraveling as he struggled to understand his own darkest impulses, and Snape's furtive shyness under Dumbledore's probing questions. But Ryan had been waiting, patiently, for the real drama, to see how both Dumbledore and Tom Riddle would react to Harry's growing powers. Because Harry's magic didn't come from any British institution. As the boy himself guessed, his abilities were born of an ancient Ilvermorny secret, an enchanted artifact thought lost. Whoever had claimed it first could rightfully call himself a killer of wizards, for it granted its bearer an overwhelming, almost destructive force. And now, at last, Harry stood on the brink of uncovering that power, and all of Hogwarts watched, some with hope, others with dread, as the next act of this long, dangerous play prepared to begin. Because Harry's magic didn't fit any known framework, both Dumbledore and Riddle simply chalked up his recent changes to normal adolescent development, and the potions he'd asked Sirius to procure seemed perfectly ordinary to them. That, they decided, was the only explanation for Harry's extraordinary aptitude in potion-making. Unbeknownst to them, Ryan had been watching all this from a shadowy corner of the Ravenclaw common room. He nearly jumped out of his seat when Luna Lovegood, normally so ethereal and dreamy, came bursting through the door, clutching a crumpled newspaper. Her cheeks were flushed, her wide eyes sparkling as she waved the paper triumphantly in Hermione's direction. Traces of wild beasts? Luna gasped. This is that little-known publication that barely sees print once every 100 years. Unless, of course, someone's discovered an entirely new species. Hermione frowned, puzzled by Luna's excitement. Before she could ask for clarification, a short, rotund wizard with thick lenses and stacks of obscure journals piled high around him piped up. Exactly, he cried, adjusting his glasses. At once, several nearby Ravenclaws, well acquainted with his eccentric obsession with rare periodicals, echoed his exclamation in unison. Ryan rolled his eyes. Of course, Ravenclaw had no shortage of oddballs, but this time, whatever strange creature they'd spotted might just be worth all the fuss. In the Ravenclaw common room, you'll often find students drawn to the strangest pursuits, among them the study of mountain monster eggs and the arcane art of egg divination. Should you choose to settle into a quiet corner with a stack of eggs and a notebook, you'll join a small fellowship who crack open yolks by day and night, charting every drip and splatter to forecast omens. No one bats an eye at the scraps of parchment filled with cryptic diagrams or at the well-thumbed obscure journals piled on nearby tables. Here, curiosity is its own reward. One particularly intriguing entry in those scattered papers dates back to January 12, 1993. It tells of Percival Pete Wexford, the celebrated explorer whose restless spirit drove him to hunt down unknown creatures. On that day, long after he'd poured his third glass of spiced gin, his companion urged him to examine a strange specimen Pete had stumbled upon. The creature's skin shimmered violet, its hooves resembled those of a mighty stallion, its tail bore the tufted flair of a lion, and its broad rhinoceros-like head sported a sweeping horn that curved nearly the length of its skull. Pete was convinced he'd named a brand new species, until an offhand remark from a visiting scholar revealed something astonishing. A nearly identical beast had already been documented in England, thousands of miles away. Luna Lovegood floated into the Ravenclaw common room, clutching a copy of the Quibbler. She passed it to a short, portly wizard, his robes slightly too big and his spectacles perpetually sliding down his nose. Clearing his throat, he began to read aloud. A recent report in the Quibbler, now gaining popularity here in the United States, confirms that the mysterious creature Pete uncovered matches the description of the scimitar-horned snorkeler. According to Swedish magic newspaper reporter Ella Stan, the beast was discovered in the Swiss plains. Curiously, no British authority has yet verified the find. Evidently, our Italian colleagues display a far greater spirit of exploration than our own homegrown wizards. He coughed, flipped the page, and continued. This account was reprinted under the title, The Tracks of the Beast. As he finished, a restless murmur swept through the Ravenclaw students. Denouncing British wizards as lacking curiosity and daring felt like a personal insult. From every corner of the circular room, voices erupted. How dare they? That's slander. Our house prides itself on discovery. One particularly fiery Ravenclaw, his voice echoing Greta Thunberg's famous catchphrase, demanded, "What's next?" "Wayne," another student called to their companion, "keep reading." All eyes turned back to the stuttering wizard, eager to hear how far the Quibbler would go. The voices she'd been waiting for drifted across the lounge once more. What's next is our Trace of the Beasts reporter's field investigation in Sweden, focusing on the scimitar-horned snorkeling, announced the stout wizard Wayne, waving his newspaper for emphasis. And we'll also cover the opening of a new Swedish reserve for these rare creatures. Only 10 remain, named in honor of their British discoverers, Xenophilius and Pandora Lovegood. After about 10 minutes, the lounge seemed to settle back into its usual calm. Only this time, every student was absorbed in some peculiar experiment. A group testing whether a sneeze could amplify a spell's power, another seeing if a carefully muffled fart could still be heard under a silencing charm, and a few intrepid souls attempting self-levitation, striving to lift themselves off the floor. Hermione blinked, as though rousing from a dream, and shook her head in bemusement. What had come over everyone? This chapter isn't over yet. Turn the page to continue the story. Hermione shook her head. Even if you're right about everything else, I still can't believe in these so-called harassment imps or joy bugs unless someone shows me real proof. Right now, what matters is that they mentioned my mother's name. Luna's pale, moonlit eyes glistened with tears. She's the quintessential Ravenclaw, always striving for breakthroughs that will stun the entire wizarding world. Her voice cracked. I mean, congratulations, I didn't mean. Before Hermione could respond, Luna flung her arms around her in a sudden hug. It was an odd sight. Luna, barely 4 feet tall, squished into the chest of a 4'6" Hermione. Have you forgotten me? Luna whispered into Hermione's robes. Both girls froze, cheeks tinged pink, until a soft clearing of a throat broke the silence. Ryan, who'd been deliberately masking his presence, stepped forward. I'm just too excited, he admitted with a sheepish grin. Luna released Hermione and slid onto the bench beside him, still sniffling. Hermione crossed her arms and shot Ryan a pointed look. You used that invisibility trick again, didn't you? She stood amid the smoky aftermath of the duel, robes torn and heart pounding. In that final critical moment, Ryan had slipped away, hidden himself from sight, and then had the audacity to ask her to go and comfort her trembling rival. The sting of her defeat pressed down on her like a weight, and she couldn't help but blame herself for believing his flimsy excuse. How had she ever trusted that he simply couldn't control his magic of concealment? Her cheeks flushed with frustration as she replayed the scene in her mind. Every strategic misstep, every missed opening in her defense, it was as if her brain had turned to water the instant the fight mattered most. All because she'd let Ryan's handsome features and easy smile distract her. She had thought his clumsy lie genuine. She'd wanted to believe in him. Now she found him standing before her, sleeves dusted with ash, posture sheepish but eyes bright. His flawless cheekbones and teasing grin nearly disarmed her anger entirely. Despite herself, she felt the sharp edge of her resentment soften. He was infuriatingly charming, no matter how badly he'd let her down. She drew in a shaky breath, steadied her shoulders, and forced herself to speak. After all, she'd beaten herself long before the dust had settled. And now, with Ryan standing there so casually at her side, she refused to let him off too easily. Chapter 404, Voldemort's Countdown to Resurrection begins. Hermione felt she had picked the wrong person to trust. If only she knew that on a windswept isle in the North Sea, Voldemort was regretting his own choice of allies. High atop that rocky island stood a fortress shrouded in mist. Inside, the Dark Lord, now a gaunt, ancient figure, poured every ounce of his fury into cursing the world. His plan had been simple: possess Antonin Dolohov's body, and then recruit the worst criminals from Azkaban, men as cruel and magically adept as his Death Eaters. He imagined a new army of horrors at his command. But when he finally shed his disguise, controlled the Dementors, and swung open the prison doors, the outcome was anything but what he'd expected. As the prisoners spilled into the dim corridors, they turned on one another with savage glee, leaving only Voldemort's true followers standing amid the carnage. Red light flickered under his hood as he surveyed the aftermath. "Tell me," he hissed, "how long have you been biding your time?" "Far too long, my lord," replied Mulciber, bowing slightly. At his side, his son inclined his head in grim agreement. "With you fully returned, what need have we of more recruits?" Even Barty Crouch Jr., who knelt beside his father's battered form, let out a harsh, joyless laugh. Mourning his father's body seemed an afterthought now that the Dark Lord himself walked among them once more. And so, with his inner circle unshaken by the massacre and their devotion reaffirmed, Voldemort took the first step in the countdown to his full resurrection, and nothing, he vowed, would stand in his way. "At last, my master, you have returned to claim your poor Bella." Bellatrix Lestrange purred, lifting her dark eyes to Voldemort, whose features, strangely reminiscent of Antonin Dolohov's, regarded her with cold detachment. At her feet lay a corpse, mute testimony to the fiery welcome she'd prepared. Rodolphus Lestrange, Bellatrix's husband, watched the scene with an almost domestic calm, as though his wife's devotion to the Dark Lord were no more remarkable than sharing a morning cup of tea. Rabaston Lestrange, Rodolphus's brother, seemed equally unperturbed. Scattered around them were the bodies of other victims, grim offerings to their master. "I only wanted to kill Muggles," Travers protested, wounded pride ringing in his voice. He was the one who had butchered Marlene McKinnon and her family without mercy. Voldemort felt rage surge through him. He had endured the sea snake's possession, swallowed curses that would have felled lesser wizards, and fought through relentless opposition just to stand here. Every wand in these Death Eaters' hands had been supplied by him for the purpose of striking back at the Ministry of Magic. Yet now, those same instruments had been used to commit these savage atrocities. Still, how could he blame them? They were his most devoted apostles. Above all, there was Bellatrix, his Bella, whose fanatic loyalty surpassed all others. She, her husband, her brother-in-law, and even Crouch Jr., had tortured Frank and Alice Longbottom into madness after his fall, all in a desperate bid to learn his secrets. Their brutality was born of their fealty. A cold, serpentine smile curved Voldemort's lips as he surveyed his followers. With a slight, deliberate raise of his wand, he summoned the dark power he had nearly lost, and prepared to unleash it upon the wizarding world once more. The Mulcers, father and son, were the last of their once illustrious house, utterly devoted to Voldemort. Travers stood nearby like a looming statue of violence. After dispatching any victim, he never failed to order the body fetched. Nothing made finer raw material for forging dark artifacts than the corpse of a wizard. Voldemort surveyed his remaining followers with thinly veiled disdain. "No news?" he asked. Only silence answered him. He spat out a sigh. "What a waste." "It may surprise you to learn," he continued, his voice cold and deliberate, "that Arthur Weasley has been appointed director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He's already transferred all the lesser prisoners to another facility." He let the information hang in the damp air. "The ones you slaughtered were the backbone of our cause, pure-blood convicts whose magic matched ours in sheer force and fanaticism." He paused, considering how far Azkaban's torments had twisted their minds. If he were to renounce Voldemort and beg Dumbledore's pardon tomorrow, he was certain even Travers would fall at the headmaster's feet in a groveling show of loyalty. "Pure-blood traitors," the Mulsers snarled in unison. "Filthy scum," they spat, "fit only to be ripped apart." Barty Crouch Jr. loomed over his father's broken body, a cruel grin splitting his face. "Father, open your eyes and look! Ha ha ha! The Weasley you despise is sitting in your place." With a deliberate stomp, he pressed his heel into Crouch Sr.'s battered cheek. Nearby, Travers knelt to inspect the fallen man. He tapped his wand gently against the elder Crouch's shriveled jaw and frowned at the bruising around his throat. "Curious," he muttered, as if poking a curious artifact rather than a human being. At Dolahov's feet, Dolahov now serving as a vessel for the Dark Lord, Bellatrix Lestrange sank to her knees. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Master, this is all my fault," she whispered, voice trembling. "I beg your forgiveness." Even in this grim company, Voldemort felt a flicker of amusement. Bellatrix's fervent devotion, offered so readily, would have been entertaining under different circumstances, if only he weren't trapped in another's body, and if she hadn't spent years weaving her own plots. He briefly imagined how satisfying it would be to indulge her displays of loyalty right in front of her husband, Rodolphus. But indulgence had no place here. Voldemort rose from Dolahov's body, his presence chilling the air. "Enough," he said coldly. "We have more pressing matters. This island's sheer cliffs and hidden caverns, coupled with the Dementors that patrol its shores, can become our ultimate stronghold. We will build a fortress that no wizard, no matter how powerful, can penetrate." A heavy silence fell as the group absorbed his words. Then Voldemort waved a hand, dismissing their theatrics. "Be still. Little Crouch, set aside your father's head. We have work to do." With that, the followers of the Dark Lord sprang into motion, determined to turn this desolate island into the impregnable bastion of their master's darkest ambitions. Inside the fortress's dimly lit chamber, Lord Voldemort observed his followers milling around a blood-stained corpse. Travers, kneeling at the victim's side, tugged at the fabric of its tattered robes. Voldemort's cold hiss cut through the silence. "Travers, stop pulling at that corpse's clothing." The Dark Lord turned to the assembled Death Eaters. "Be patient and study the runic wards carved into these walls. Soon you will trigger the enchantments left behind by the evil wizard Axtis. At that moment, I will summon the Dementors to complete the transformation." A thrill of anticipation electrified the room. Bella's hand shot up, her eyes blazing with cruelty. "Master, why not attack the Ministry of Magic directly? While we're at it, I want to sever Arthur Weasley's head. No, the entire Weasley family's heads. There are 9 of them, after all. Imagine the sight of their trophies piled high." A faint, innocent smile curved Traverse's lips as he raised his own hand. That would certainly trump what Marlene McKinnon's family endured. He glanced around, as if imparting a secret lesson. "You may not know this, but Dumbledore once used what was left of my body and the remnants of my soul to create a younger version of me in a moment of failure. He twisted that new me into believing that wizards should protect muggles and uphold his morals." He leaned back, savoring his own revelation. "That younger incarnation now stands at Hogwarts as Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts. Thankfully, he lacks the power I wield." And Dumbledore didn't stop there. He even freed the defeated Grindelwald from Nurmengard to serve his own purposes. Voldemort's red eyes flicked from face to face. "None of that matters now. Prepare yourselves. When the wards activate and the Dementors arrive, our vengeance will be unstoppable." A hush fell over the chamber as the Death Eaters bent once more to the ancient runes, each mind ablaze with the promise of renewed power and unspeakable cruelty. "Igor Karkaroff now answers to me, and Durmstrang will serve as our base," Voldemort announced, his voice echoing through the vaulted chamber. "But don't worry. Do you know why they tremble? Because they dread my full resurrection. They fear that I will once again stand unrivaled as the greatest wizard in the world. Even Dumbledore, so desperate to thwart me, is prepared to cast aside his precious principles, his so-called love." A harsh laugh rattled from his throat. "To buy the time I need to return to power, we must first forge an unbreakable stronghold." He reached out and stroked the scraggly, oil-stained beard of the old Antonin Dolohov's body, his current vessel. Bellatrix's breath caught in her chest. "Master, you are so captivating," she whispered, heat rising to her cheeks. She'd never considered Dolohov's decrepit frame alluring before. Yet now every wrinkle, every fleck of grime, every tangled lock of beard struck her as intoxicating. Travers swallowed hard, eyes wide with fear. "My lord, the young you," Voldemort waved him silent. "You're not needed for that," he said coolly. "Your task is to buy me time. Azkaban, those corpses, the Dementors, they are the perfect ingredients for my resurrection." He swept his hand in a grand gesture. Outside, thunder rolled, sealing the promise of dark days to come. Crouch Jr. gently lowered his father's head to the cold stone floor. "How long will it take?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Voldemort leaned back against the wall, folding his arms with an air of confidence. 1 year? Just 1 year, he replied, his tone unnervingly calm. Chapter 405, 3 Elements of Voldemort's Resurrection. Ryan leaned over the dark, half-drawn diagram of Azkaban and felt no surprise at Voldemort's choice of prison for his resurrection. In fact, the fortress already provided everything the Dark Lord needed, once he made just a few sinister adjustments. First, since its conversion into Britain's premier wizarding penitentiary in 1718, the Ministry of Magic had cloaked Azkaban from the Muggle world and rendered it unplottable. Centuries of repairs and enchantments had left every brick, every iron railing, humming with magic. With only minor modifications, Voldemort could intensify those spells until Azkaban vanished even from a wizard's sight, a prison in one reality, a phantom in another. Second, woven into Azkaban's foundations was the ingenious eternal expansion charm, designed to stretch its interior on demand so that every criminal in the United Kingdom could be confined within its walls. Deep in its bowels lay a secluded cemetery where despairing prisoners who died in captivity were laid to rest. Their bones, saturated with the anguish of broken wizards, supplied the second essential ingredient for Voldemort's ritual rebirth. Third, Azkaban's origins reached back to the 15th century. Over hundreds of years, its stones had absorbed layers of ancient magic, prime raw material for a rite steeped in history and power. That age-old sorcery formed the final pillar of Voldemort's resurrection scheme. With concealment spells, wizardly remains, and centuries-old enchantments all in place, Azkaban would serve simultaneously as his impregnable stronghold and the cradle of his dark return. Long ago, on a windswept isle in the Hebrides, stood a bleak fortress, home to the dark wizard who called himself Extus. He lured unsuspecting muggles to his island under false pretenses, then subjected them to unspeakable torture until their deaths. In their final moments, the victims' agony and despair fueled Extus's sorcery, coalescing into a malignant creature, the first Dementor, a soulless entity born to feed on happiness and devour human souls. For years, Extus's concealment enchantment shrouded both fortress and island from the wider wizarding world. Only when he finally fell in a cataclysmic duel did the spell dissipate, and with it, the secret of the Isle was laid bare. The Ministry of Magic, newly aware of the threat, nevertheless hesitated to intervene. To destroy the fortress would surely provoke the Dementors, and no known magic could guarantee victory against such horrors. Thus, for 2 full centuries, the Dementors flourished in isolation, their numbers slowly swelling in the darkest corners of that abandoned stronghold. When the International Statute of Secrecy was ratified, the exposed fortress posed an intolerable risk. Many ministers urged its immediate obliteration. But in the 17th century, Minister Damocles' role stood firm. He argued that even small wizarding prisons inevitably became prone to noisy jailbreaks, clanking iron, stray lights, foul odors, all threatening to reveal the magical community. And erecting a turnkey prison so remote amidst the Hebridean storms would demand years of labor and untold resources. So the fortress remained, its walls haunted by the echoes of Extus's cruelty, and by the gliding shadows of the Dementors, ever hungry, ever waiting. With Rower's aid, the Dementors, whose numbers had been dwindling for want of fresh souls, discovered a new source of sustenance, the terror of living prisoners and the souls of the dead. For 4 long centuries they have preyed on Azkaban's inmates, storing away the accumulated despair and malice. These centuries of concentrated negative emotion, combined with the ancient power of the Dementors themselves, completed the final ingredients needed for Lord Voldemort's return. In 1717, the Ministry of Magic passed a sweeping statute. Anyone who casts an unforgivable curse on another witch or wizard would be condemned to life in Azkaban. The only exceptions are if the accused can prove they were under the imp, Arius curse, or were acting under explicit ministry authorization, such as when an Auror is ordered to use these curses during wartime, or when a pardoning charm has been granted. As a result of this law, even after Arthur Weasley secured the release of Azkaban's lesser offenders, the prison remained packed with hardened criminals. To Voldemort, those men and women in Azkaban were more than mere prisoners. They were his backup Death Eater force. He counted 3 veteran operatives and 2 eager novices among their ranks, ready to join him once he rose again. Voldemort hadn't counted on this. As he hurriedly briefed his Death Eaters on the prison's grim history, hoping to forestall any sudden attack by Dumbledore and his allies, the very followers he'd armed turned on the defenseless inmates and slaughtered them all. Ryan was convinced that Voldemort's choice of this fortress went beyond the 4 reasons he'd cited. He also aimed to tap into its deepest, most forbidden reserves of power. In the original timeline, Voldemort planned to accumulate magical energy over years, then select a living wizard as a vessel, possess him, and thereby regain a physical form. But the sudden reappearance of Professor Quirrell, and, more critically, the existence of the Philosopher's Stone, forced him into a desperate gamble. The stone promised a far mightier resurrection. Failure, by contrast, would condemn him to more than a fleeting, feral existence in Albania. That gamble failed thanks to Harry's mother's sacrificial protection. Voldemort's defeat should have kept him sidelined until Harry graduated. Instead, fate intervened. Peter Pettigrew slipped into service as a compliant wizard slave, and when Bertha Jorkins, driven by vengeance, murdered him in a fit of rage, she unwittingly delivered Voldemort news of a Death Eater whose talents far surpassed Peter's. In the dim vaults of the Ministry, Voldemort reached out through Peter Pettigrew's body, wresting control of Bartemius Crouch Sr. and forcing him to free his imprisoned son, Barty Crouch Jr. This dark triumph sparked a new idea in the Dark Lord's mind, a triple sacrifice ritual using the blood of his enemies, the flesh of his servants, and the bones of his forebears. On its own, this method would have been far too weak, but if he added Harry Potter's blood, the ritual would not only restore his strength, but also break the protective power of Lily's love that bound Harry's life to his own. Once he committed to this horrific plan, Voldemort remained hidden at the ritual site, still too feeble for a full return. To buy himself time, he manipulated Minister Fudge and Albus Dumbledore into a fierce duel high above the grounds, hoping to stall for every precious moment needed to recover. But the world had been altered by Ryan's interference, and Voldemort found himself uncharacteristically unsettled. The cold certainty of victory that once guided his every move was gone. Cornered and desperate, he siphoned the last remnants of magic from Quirrell's twisted spirit to fuel his escape. Then, in a final act of cruelty, he began consuming the very life force of his loyal Death Eaters, each soul granting only a flicker of renewed power, hardly enough to sate his hunger, but enough to keep him from immediate collapse. His sights then fell on the legendary Elder Wand. Voldemort understood that with its unparalleled power he could complete his resurrection at full strength. But Ryan, determined that the Dark Lord should not upset his freshly reordered world, intervened. In a single decisive strike, Ryan destroyed Fenrir Greyback, the werewolf earmarked as the second ritual sacrifice. With Greyback's life force extinguished, Voldemort's intricate plans unraveled before his eyes. In that moment, the Dark Lord was struck down to the same pitiful condition he had occupied before his first rebirth through Quirrell. Wounded, frustrated, and deprived of both ritual and wand, Voldemort vanished into the night, his grand designs in ruins, forced once again to rebuild from the shadows. Voldemort found himself trapped once more, unable to seize a new wizard's body as he had with Professor Quirrell. In theory, he should have retreated to the Albanian forest to rebuild his strength in secret. Fate, however, had other plans. His weakened spirit materialized before Death Eater Walton McNeil, and in that moment of desperation, McNeil dared to do the unthinkable. He bound Voldemort's essence to his own body, just as Quirrell once had. With tears in his eyes, Voldemort accepted this borrowed flesh. Revived, he summoned his scattered followers and proposed a bold strategy: negotiate with Albus Dumbledore, drag out the talks, and wear the headmaster down, postponing full resurrection for the time being. But before he could put his plan into motion, Gellert Grindelwald struck again. This time, Grindelwald not only shattered Voldemort's makeshift vessel, but also siphoned Walton McNeil's magic, exactly as he had drained Quirrell. Armed with that stolen power, Grindelwald regained the terrifying ability to possess unwitting hosts at will. Faced with the combined threat of a resurgent Grindelwald, Harry Potter's burgeoning potential, and Dumbledore's implacable resolve, Voldemort made a startling choice. He would consign himself to Azkaban. It was a desperate gambit he had entertained many times, and one Harry Potter had even glimpsed in a hidden vision. Yet the plan carried a fatal flaw. By locking himself away, Voldemort would be bound to the wizarding world's most secure prison for an entire year, utterly powerless until his sentence was served. Voldemort weighed his options in the flickering torchlight. He could resurrect himself in a far stronger form, one fueled by 4 centuries' worth of hatred, by Dementors, and by the corpses of countless wizards. But the ritual would take almost an entire year to complete. If Dumbledore and his allies broke into Azkaban during that time, they could easily disrupt the ceremony and leave him shattered. And even if the spell succeeded, he still would need months to recover before he could seize a new body. Time enough, perhaps, for Harry Potter to grow old and see grandchildren of his own. The very thought of such a humiliating failure made Voldemort's crimson eyes blaze. He turned to the Death Eaters he had instructed in the arcane secrets of transforming Azkaban, and with deliberate calm began to chant the long, complex incantation that would bind centuries of dark power to his will. Chapter 182. Weird Neville Dementors are nightmarish, humanoid beings nearly 3 meters tall, swathed in tattered black cloaks that conceal bodies like rotting corpses. They glide just above the ground but cannot pass through solid barriers. When a Dementor inhales, it emits a wet, gurgling rasp, as though drawing in more than mere air. Its skeletal hands, pale and glistening with an eerie sheen, seem perpetually slick with foul mucus, and a penetrating cold clings to its every movement. Peering out from under its hood are hollow eye sockets sealed by thin, scabbed skin. Below them yawns a formless, gaping maw, the instrument of the Dementor's most dreaded curse, the Dementor's kiss. In that horrific act, the creature pulls back its hood and sucks out its victim's very soul, leaving behind nothing but a motionless shell, biologically alive, but stripped of identity, emotion, and will. In the eyes of every witch and wizard, only the Patronus charm can repel such a horror. Yet tonight, in the dim light of the castle's corridor, something unbelievable has happened. A torrent of Dementors burst forth from an unremarkable fortress perched on a tiny island in the North Sea. No one could have imagined so many of those soul-sucking wraiths packed into such a small stronghold. Yet they weren't bound or banished by the familiar Patronus charm. Instead, some arcane enchantment held them fast, each creature glowing with an eerie green light. Under that sorcery, the swirling mass of Dementors began to orbit the island, weaving together into a vast, translucent emerald dome that crept outward until it enclosed every inch of land as if by a glass canopy. Simultaneously, distant, agonized cries, at first faint, grew steadily louder, as though hundreds of tormented souls were wailing in unison. From the fortress's blackened battlements, thick smoke billowed skyward, coalescing into a roiling, thunderous cloud that seemed alive with malice. Then, click, 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 the cloud disgorged a hail of bone-white shafts, each as sharp as an arrow, raining down upon the rocky shoreline. In their wake, a ghostly white wall rose from the crags, its battlements gleaming like polished ivory. To any ordinary witch or wizard, the green barrier, the screaming shadow cloud, and the skeletal ramparts were three utterly incompatible magics. Yet here they stood, fused into a single, dread command of dark power. From his vantage among the rolling waves, Ryan could sense a delicate lattice of magic enfolding the island, an invisible seal that bound its ruined fortress and its lone inhabitant into a single enchanted whole. Deep within those ancient walls, the flesh-and-blood avatar of Voldemort, crafted by Antonin Dolohov, lay shattered. Only a bleached skeleton remained. Yet through the surge of sea wind and salty spray, Ryan perceived a new pulse, a faint, steady heartbeat in the arcane currents that only a wizard of his caliber could detect. The Dark Lord's resurrection ritual had begun. Voldemort believed his followers would fall upon the island to defend him. He was wrong. No one would intervene, because only the fully resurrected Voldemort could be slain once and for all, and that task would fall to Riddle himself. Grindelwald, the only wizard with the power to challenge this grim rebirth, had already been alerted to the truth by Dumbledore. With a silent shake of his head, Ryan watched the island slip beneath the waves, then dissolved into the air, vanishing like mist. Thousands of miles away in his study at Hogwarts, Professor Dumbledore frowned as he waved his hand through the air. The memory of Azkaban's precise location shimmered and then faded from his mind. Frustrated, he slammed his fist upon the desk. "Have you heard? Azkaban's gone." Professor McGonagall stepped forward, bowing her head. "They dispatched Aurors to the North Sea, sir. They've searched every inlet and shoal, yet there's no trace of the island." Dumbledore's eyes darkened. "How is that even possible?" Harry strode across the castle courtyard toward Charm's class. Ron and Hermione, too, Luz beside him. A group of older students hurried past, their voices low but urgent. "An entire island, and we still have Dementors roaming around," one complained. "Forget that. Did you hear what Flint's up to now?" "Something's brewing," another whispered. "Speaking of events, Saturday's Slytherin versus Ravenclaw match should be a good one," a third said, twirling his wand in anticipation. "I heard there was trouble at Azkaban last night," someone added. "It has to be Voldemort's doing," the first student concluded grimly. Harry's heart tightened. Just a few months ago, he'd dreamed that Voldemort was planning to break into Azkaban and free his followers. Ron, fiddling with his newly wrapped dragonhide wand handle, a luxury he'd finally afforded thanks to his recent profits from skeving snack boxes, looked up anxiously. "Should we skip class and investigate?" "Not yet," Harry said, lowering his voice so the Ravenclaws walking ahead wouldn't overhear. "Let's ask Hagrid after Charms. He might know what's happened." They reached the door of Professor Flitwick's classroom just as it swung open with a squeak. Neville Longbottom and Parvati Patil were already filing inside, and the others fell into place around the desks. "Good morning, everyone," Professor Flitwick chirped from behind his lectern. His bright eyes lit up as he surveyed the room. "Please be seated and open your standard book of spells, grade 2, to page 76. Today's lesson is the tickling charm, Rictus Empra." Harry sank into his seat, wand at the ready, determination stirring. Rumors of Azkaban and Voldemort's next move could wait until after class. For now, he needed to master the new spell. The classroom fell silent as Professor Flitwick fluttered to the front of the room, tapping his tiny wand against his desk. Morning light gleamed through the tall windows of Charm's class, catching motes of dust in the air. "Today," he began, voice bright, "we're going to look at one of the most underappreciated spells in any duelist's arsenal, Rictus Empra, the tickling charm. Why, in fact, is it ranked among the top 10 spells for defeating an opponent with minimal effort?" He clicked his wand toward Harry, whose attention had drifted to the window. Harry jerked upright. Yes, Professor." "Mr. Potter," Flitwick prompted, "please explain." Harry swallowed, but then launched confidently into his answer. The incantation itself, Rictus Empra, comes from Latin. Rictus means open-mouthed grin, or laughter, and semper means always. So, literally, it means always laugh. In a duel, the charm forces your opponent into uncontrollable giggles, breaking their concentration so they can't cast further spells. Even if they're adept at nonverbal magic, their focus is shattered. Exactly, Flitwick beamed. 1 point for Ravenclaw. Harry allowed himself a small, relieved grin until Flitwick tapped the tip of his wand on the desk and peered over his spectacles. However, Mr. Potter, I've awarded you only 1 point. Care to guess why? Harry's face reddened. Because I was too distracted, Professor. Precisely, Flitwick smiled kindly. Attention in class, Mr. Potter. As Harry sank back into his seat, Neville Longbottom raised his hand. The professor looked surprised and called on him. Yes, Mr. Longbottom. Neville cleared his throat, clutching his quill. Flitwick leaned forward, curiosity dancing in his eyes. What's on your mind, Mr. Longbottom? I understand why Harry's been so distracted. It's not his fault, Hermione murmured, exchanging a worried look with Ron. Neville, however, looked as if he could barely contain himself. Professor, is it true? Has Azkaban vanished? His voice was urgent, almost pleading, and he clenched his fists as though ready to face an unseen enemy. Professor Flitwick offered a gentle, almost fond smile. Yes, Neville, it's true. You won't have read about it in the Daily Prophet, nor has the Ministry issued a public statement. He paused, fixing Neville with a kindly glance. I realize this news matters more to me of you than my charms class, especially to Mr. Longbottom. Flitwick's tone grew earnest. But I trust you won't let it distract you from your studies. Who knows when one of today's spells might prove vital? Neville gave a small, determined nod, though his eyes were rimmed with red. He remained restless for the remainder of the lesson, lost in thought, while Flitwick carried on without comment. Harry watched Neville with concern, briefly setting aside his own fears about Voldemort. What's up with Neville? He whispered to Ron. Ron shrugged. I haven't the faintest. As for Neville, even though they'd spent an entire day alone together shortly after arriving at Hogwarts, Ron still knew very little about him.